Ethan Miller's pickup truck carved through the midnight silence on Millhaven's forgotten back road. The headlights cut yellow paths through darkness, so thick it felt supreme, illuminating nothing but endless rows of pine and the occasional deer crossing sign. The digital clock on his dashboard glowed 11:47 p.m., nearly midnight, and he was bone-tired. "You doing okay back there, buddy?" Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror at his 8-year-old son, Noah, who had finally broken his fever after 3 days at Millhaven General. The boy's face was pale in the dim light, but his green eyes, Rachel's eyes, were bright and alert. "I'm okay, Dad, just tired." Noah's voice was small but steady, the kind of quiet strength that reminded Ethan so much of his late wife. It made his chest ache. 10 months since cancer took Rachel. 10 months of working night shifts at the Riverwood paper mill, of learning to make school lunches, of figuring out how to braid Noah's stuffed elephant's yarn hair the way she used to. 10 months of drowning in medical debt while trying to keep his son's world from falling apart. The back road through the pine forest was supposed to be a shortcut home to their small rental house near the mill, a tired 2-bedroom structure with faded blue siding that smelled of wood smoke and old carpets. But tonight the darkness seemed to pull at them, as if the forest itself didn't want them to pass. Ethan slowed the truck as his headlights struck something that shouldn't exist. A weathered oak tree stood alone among the pines, ancient and massive. His headlights illuminated a wooden sign hanging from one thick branch. The words, "White Man Don't Forgive," painted in dripping crimson letters. And bound to the massive trunk was a woman. She hung motionless, suspended by ropes that wrapped around her wrists and the tree bark. Her expensive suit, the kind worn by executives who commanded boardrooms, was torn at the seams. Designer heels dangled inches from the frost-kissed earth, and her dark hair cascaded over a face that belonged in corporate high-rises, not tied to ancient bark on a deserted highway. "Daddy?" Noah's voice cut through the suffocating quiet. "There's someone out there." The woman's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Her fingers bore rope burns that told a story Ethan wasn't prepared to read. "Stay in the truck, buddy," Ethan called, killing the engine and stepping into the October chill. His breath formed small clouds in the air. The scent of damp earth mingled with something metallic that made his stomach clench. Noah pressed his face against the rear window, eyes wide with the kind of curiosity that 8-year-olds shouldn't possess at midnight on deserted roads. The woman's breathing was shallow but steady when Ethan approached. Up close, he could see the expensive cut of her suit, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Her shoes were Italian leather, now scuffed from whatever struggle had brought her to this tree. The rope around her wrists was professional quality, tied with knots that spoke of experience rather than desperation. When she lifted her head, piercing blue eyes met his, swollen but tearless, holding a strength that surprised him. "Don't," she whispered, her voice rough from hours of silence. "Don't untie the rope." Ethan's hands froze halfway to the knots. The woman's accent carried traces of Eastern Europe, refined by years of American education. "They're watching," she continued, glancing toward the tree line where shadows seemed to shift and breathe. "If you untie me, they'll know someone helped." The forest pressed in around them, ancient pines creating a cathedral of darkness, broken only by his truck's headlights. Noah's small hand tapped against the glass, a rhythm that matched Ethan's racing heartbeat. The woman's eyes followed the sound, and something softened in her expression when she saw the child. "Who are they?" Ethan asked, scanning the darkness for movement. The woman studied his face with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading people for a living. Her gaze lingered on his calloused hands, the oil stains on his work shirt, the worry lines that had deepened since Rachel's death. "I did something," she said finally. "Something that threatens powerful people. And now I have to pay for it." The admission carried weight like a confession spoken in church. Ethan found himself believing her, though every instinct screamed that the situation defied logic. A rustling in the undergrowth made them both freeze, but it was only a deer crossing the road 50 yards away. "I'm Alexandra Shaw," she said, as if proper introductions mattered in this surreal moment. "Call me Alex." "Ethan Miller," he replied, "and that's Noah in the truck." At the mention of his name, the boy waved through the glass, and Alex's mouth curved into what might have been a smile under different circumstances. "Hi, Noah," she called softly, and the child beamed back at her. The simple exchange created an unexpected warmth in the cold night air. Ethan looked at his son, then back at this mysterious woman who somehow made being tied to a tree seem like a temporary inconvenience rather than a life-threatening crisis. "You can't stay here all night," Ethan said, stating the obvious. Alex's breath formed small puffs as she spoke. "If I disappear now, they'll come looking for you and Noah." The threat was delivered matter-of-factly without drama, which somehow made it more believable. "Can you trust me for 1 week?" she asked, her blue eyes searching his face. The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Ethan thought of Rachel's final words about doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. He thought of Noah's innocent wave and the way this stranger had responded with genuine warmth. "Depends on what you're asking me to do," he said finally. Alex's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I know you work at Riverwood Industries. The paper mill is poisoning the water in Millhaven. I have proof, but they found out what I know." Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. The words echoed something Rachel had tried to tell him before she died. "How do you know where I work?" he asked, suddenly wary. "I know a lot of things, Mr. Miller, including that your wife died of leukemia, a disease that appears 5 times more frequently in Millhaven than the national average." 20 minutes later, Ethan's truck pulled into the gravel driveway of their rental house. Alex had refused to come inside, citing safety concerns for Noah, and had instead accepted reluctant shelter in the detached garage. Ethan had provided blankets, a thermos of coffee, and a promise to return at dawn. Noah had fallen asleep during the drive home, exhausted by fever and the night's strange events. As Ethan carried his son inside, the boy mumbled, "Is the lady going to be okay, Daddy?" The question followed Ethan into his own restless sleep. Before Rachel's diagnosis, their life had been different. They'd owned a small house in the suburbs of Portland, where Rachel worked as an environmental engineer for a consulting firm, and Ethan managed a construction crew. Weekends meant hiking trails with Noah, barbecues with friends, planning for a future that seemed secure. Then came the fatigue Rachel couldn't shake, the bruises that appeared without cause, the diagnosis that changed everything. 2 years of treatment drained their savings and maxed out their credit cards. When Rachel died, Ethan sold their house to pay the remaining medical bills and moved to Millhaven for the only job he could find, operating machinery at the Riverwood paper mill. The night shifts were brutal, 12 hours of mind-numbing work in a cacophony of industrial noise. But they paid enough to keep a roof over Noah's head and food on the table. Ethan had learned to function on 4 hours of sleep, to help with homework while half-conscious, to become both mother and father to a boy who still cried for his mom in the middle of the night. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, with frost covering the garage windows when Ethan stepped outside at 7:00 a.m. Inside, Alex sat cross-legged on a sleeping bag, laptop balanced on her knees, looking every inch the corporate executive despite spending the night among garden tools and Noah's bicycle. She had somehow managed to make coffee using a camping stove from the emergency supplies, and the garage smelled pleasantly of caffeine and wood shavings. "Good morning," she said without looking up from her screen. "I've been reviewing the files. It's worse than I initially thought." The casual delivery of devastating news seemed to be her specialty. Ethan poured himself coffee from her pot and studied the data scrolling across her laptop screen. Charts and graphs painted a picture of systematic environmental contamination that had been ongoing for over 15 years. "The groundwater contamination affects the entire Millhaven municipal system," Alex explained, highlighting sections of her report. "Heavy metals, industrial solvents, chemical compounds that shouldn't exist in drinking water." Her finger traced a timeline that showed contamination levels increasing steadily over the past decade. "The cancer rates in this town are 5 times the national average," she continued. "Leukemia specifically is 7 times higher than it should be." The numbers blurred as Ethan processed their meaning. Rachel's illness, the unusually high number of funerals in their small town, Mrs. Henderson from down the street whose husband had died of liver cancer last year after 40 years at the mill. "How many people know about this?" Ethan asked, his voice barely audible. Alex closed the laptop and met his eyes. "Victor Hammond knows. He's known for years." Riverwood Industries CEO, a man Ethan had only seen in company newsletters and at the annual Christmas party, always standing slightly apart from the workers with his expensive suit and perfect silver hair. "I'm a senior environmental analyst at EcoWatch Consulting," she explained. "My firm was hired to create an environmental impact assessment that would minimize liability while allowing continued operations. But I found evidence they've been actively covering up the contamination, falsifying reports, bribing inspectors, threatening whistleblowers." The garage door rattled as Noah pushed it open, still wearing his dinosaur pajamas and dragging a stuffed elephant behind him. "Daddy, who's the lady in our garage?" he asked with the direct curiosity that children wielded like a superpower. Alex smiled, and for the first time since meeting her, Ethan saw genuine warmth in her expression. "Hi, Noah," she said. "I'm Alex. I'm a friend of your daddy's." The boy approached with the fearlessness of someone who had never learned to distrust strangers. "Do you like pancakes?" he asked. "I can make them if Daddy helps." The offer was extended with the serious generosity that 8-year-olds reserve for people they instinctively trusted. Within an hour, the three of them sat around Ethan's small kitchen table, sharing a breakfast of slightly burned pancakes and stories that revealed more than any formal introduction could have managed. Noah dominated the breakfast conversation, telling Alex about school, his favorite science experiments, and his mother's promise that angels would take care of their family. Alex listened with the attention usually reserved for boardroom presentations, asking follow-up questions and remembering details that made Noah glow with importance. "So you're a scientist?" Noah asked, maple syrup forming a sticky moat around his pancake castle. Alex nodded. "I study how chemicals affect water and soil. I look for things that might make people sick." "Like microbes?" Noah's eyes widened with interest. "We learned about those in science class. They're super tiny but can make you really sick." "Exactly like that," Alex agreed. "Some chemicals are so small you can't see them, but they can change the water in ways that hurt people." "Is that why the water tastes funny here?" Noah asked innocently. "Mom always made me drink filtered water. She said the tap water wasn't good." Ethan and Alex exchanged glances over Noah's head. Rachel had insisted on a top-of-the-line water filter system even when they could barely afford groceries. At the time, Ethan had thought it an unnecessary expense. Now he wondered what else his wife had known. After breakfast, Alex took Noah to the backyard to collect water samples from puddles formed by the morning rain. She showed him how to use test strips to check for acidity and explained in simple terms how pollution travels through water systems. While they were occupied, Ethan went to the hall closet where he'd stored boxes of Rachel's personal effects, things he hadn't been able to bring himself to sort through after her death. In the third box, beneath photo albums and winter sweaters, he found what he was looking for: Rachel's research journals. His hands trembled as he opened the most recent one, dated just weeks before her final hospitalization. The pages were filled with Rachel's neat handwriting, chemical formulas, and water test results from various locations around Millhaven. Her final entries contained circled notes about elevated levels of specific chemicals in the groundwater, the same compounds Alex had identified on her laptop screen. On the last page, Rachel had written a single sentence that made Ethan's throat tighten. "Riverwood knows. Hammond must be held accountable." When Alex and Noah returned from their backyard science expedition, Ethan showed her Rachel's journals. Alex's face paled as she flipped through the pages. "She knew," Alex whispered. "She was gathering evidence." "Could this have caused her cancer?" Ethan asked, the question he'd been afraid to voice now hanging between them. Alex hesitated, then nodded slowly. "The chemicals we've identified are known carcinogens. The timeline matches the increased exposure. I can't say with absolute certainty, but statistically, yes, it's highly probable." Noah had wandered into the living room to watch cartoons, leaving the adults to their somber conversation. "Tell me about the USB drive," Ethan said, changing the subject before emotion could overwhelm practicality. Alex reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a small device that looked innocuous enough to be overlooked. 15 years of falsified environmental reports, internal memos discussing contamination levels, email exchanges between Victor Hammond and state inspectors, bank records showing bribes. She placed it on the table between them like evidence in a trial. "Why haven't you released it already?" Ethan asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Alex's fingers drummed against the table surface, a nervous habit that humanized her corporate composure. Because Victor offered me $50 million for a comprehensive water treatment system that would clean up the contamination over the next 5 years, she said. Everyone gets clean water. No one loses their job. The company transitions to sustainable practices. The proposal sounded reasonable, almost too reasonable for someone who had allegedly spent years covering up environmental crimes. But you don't trust him, Ethan observed. Alex's laugh held no humor. Would you trust someone who tied you to a tree? She opened her laptop again, showing Ethan a series of technical documents. I had our engineering team analyze his proposal. It's a classic greenwashing scheme, designed to look impressive while doing the bare minimum. The system he's proposing would remove some visible contaminants, but leave the most dangerous carcinogens untouched. It's a PR stunt, not a solution. So the $50 million is just hush money, Ethan said, the pieces falling into place. Exactly. And when I told him I wouldn't sign off on it, that I was going to the EPA instead, she gestured to her rope-burned wrist. Well, you saw where that got me. The afternoon passed with the strange domesticity of people thrown together by circumstances beyond their control. Alex helped Noah with homework that had been sent home during his sick days, displaying a patience and knowledge that suggested teaching experience. Ethan found himself watching their interactions with fascination, seeing his son respond to female attention for the first time since Rachel's death. When Noah announced his intention to show Alex his rock collection, acquired during walks around Millhaven, Ethan realized that his carefully constructed boundaries were already dissolving. The woman who had appeared tied to a tree was becoming part of their daily routine with unsettling ease. Evening brought a phone call that shattered their temporary peace. The caller ID showed only numbers, but when Ethan answered, a cultured voice with southern inflections filled the kitchen. "Mr. Miller," the man said, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Victor Hammond's tone carried the casual authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I think you have the wrong number," Ethan replied, though his hands were already shaking. "Do I? A mutual friend of ours seems to have gone missing, Alexandra Shaw. Perhaps you've seen her." The use of Alex's full name felt like a threat wrapped in politeness. Alex appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face pale but determined. She held out her hand for the phone, and Ethan reluctantly passed it over. "Hello, Victor," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers. "I was wondering when you'd call." The conversation that followed was conducted in corporate speak, full of veiled threats and diplomatic language that somehow made the danger feel more real rather than less. "I'm sure we can come to an arrangement," Victor said, his voice carrying clearly through the phone speaker. "Why don't we meet tomorrow evening? Millhaven Diner, just the three of us." The invitation sounded like a royal summons. After Alex hung up, Noah wandered into the kitchen wearing his rocket ship pajamas and carrying his stuffed elephant. "Who was that man?" he asked with the directness that made adult conversations impossible. Ethan knelt to his son's level, searching for words that would convey safety without dishonesty. "Someone who wants to talk to Alex about her work," he said finally. Noah nodded as if this explanation made perfect sense, then surprised them both by walking over to Alex and offering her his elephant. "Mr. Trunk helps when I'm scared," he said seriously. "You can borrow him tonight." The gesture reduced Alex to tears she tried unsuccessfully to hide. When Noah had gone to bed, Alex explained more about her background. "Before I joined EcoWatch, I worked in corporate security consulting," she admitted. "I specialized in protecting companies from industrial espionage, identifying threats, securing sensitive information, that sort of thing." "That explains why you're so calm about all this," Ethan observed. Alex smiled grimly. "I've been on the other side. I know how these people think, how they operate, which is why I know Victor isn't planning to negotiate tomorrow. He's planning to eliminate the problem permanently." "You mean us," Ethan said, the reality of their situation sinking in. "Yes, the USB drive is just an excuse to get us in the open. He wants to recover the evidence and make sure no one can ever connect him to what's happened in Millhaven." Ethan thought of Noah sleeping peacefully down the hall, unaware that his father was now entangled in a corporate conspiracy that had already claimed his mother's life. "What do we do?" he asked, feeling utterly out of his depth. Alex was about to respond when her phone chimed with a text message. As she read it, her face went pale. "We need to move. Now, she said, showing him the screen. The message, from an unnamed contact, read simply, Hammond activated cleanup crew. Package removal scheduled for tomorrow. Not a negotiation. What does that mean? Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. It means Victor has hired professionals to make us disappear, Alex said grimly. We need help. Deputy Sheriff Maria Rodriguez arrived at their house 30 minutes later, driving an unmarked sedan and wearing civilian clothes. A compact woman in her early 40s with intelligent, dark eyes, she carried herself with the steady presence that suggested military training. Alexandra, she said, embracing Alex with the familiarity of old friendship. You always did know how to find trouble. Her accent carried traces of New Mexico, warm and musical, despite the gravity of their situation. Noah had woken up during the commotion and now peered at the newcomer from behind Ethan's legs. Maria and I went to college together, Alex explained as they moved into the living room, before she became a law enforcement officer and I became a corporate sellout. The comment held self-recrimination that Maria addressed with a sharp look. You became someone who could make a difference, she corrected, which is why we're all here instead of letting Victor Hammond bury this like he's buried everything else. She accepted Ethan's offer of coffee and settled into their worn sofa with the ease of someone comfortable in any environment. Noah climbed onto the opposite end of the sofa and began explaining his rock collection with the enthusiasm reserved for captive audiences. Maria listened to Noah's geological theories with the same attention she gave to Alex's evidence of corporate malfeasance, asking questions that made the boy beam with importance while demonstrating her ability to multitask under pressure. When Noah finally drifted back to sleep, the adults gathered around the kitchen table to review the USB drive's contents. Maria's expression grew progressively darker as she scrolled through file after file of damning evidence. This is prosecutable, she said finally. Federal prosecutors would salivate over evidence this comprehensive. She looked up from the screen to meet Alex's eyes. But getting it to them alive is going to require some creative thinking. Millhaven Sheriff's Department has been receiving generous donations from Riverwood Industries for years. I'm not sure who we can trust locally. What about state police? Alex asked. Maria shook her head. Not enough time to brief them properly, and Victor has connections throughout state government. She scrolled through her contacts with the focused intensity of someone calculating limited options. I have friends in the FBI Environmental Crimes Unit, she said finally, but they're in Denver, 8 hours away. He wants to meet tomorrow evening, Ethan said, showing Maria the threatening photographs of Noah that Victor had left at the mill. Her jaw tightened as she studied the images, professional anger replacing casual warmth. Textbook intimidation, she observed. Professional quality surveillance photos designed to demonstrate capability rather than provide evidence. She handed the photos back to Ethan with careful control. He's not planning to negotiate. He's planning to eliminate witnesses and recover the evidence. The confirmation of their fears felt like a death sentence, but Maria's presence suggested possibilities beyond surrender or flight. As Maria continued examining the USB contents, she suddenly stopped on a particular file, her expression changing from professional to deeply concerned. Alex, look at this, she said, turning the laptop toward her friend. Alex leaned forward, eyes scanning the document. It's a medical report, she murmured, then looked up at Ethan with a mixture of sympathy and horror. It's about Rachel. Ethan felt the room tilt slightly. What about Rachel? Maria turned the screen so he could see. It was an internal memo from Riverwood's legal department, dated 3 months before Rachel's diagnosis. Subject, potential whistleblower, R. Miller, the heading read. Below was a detailed summary of Rachel's water testing activities around Millhaven, her request for public water quality reports, and her communications with the state environmental agency. The final paragraph made Ethan's blood run cold. Recommend immediate containment strategy. Subject has sufficient evidence to trigger regulatory investigation. Employment termination of spouse, E. Miller maintenance deputy, should be considered if subject pursues complaint. They knew, Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. They knew what she was doing. There's more, Maria said gently, scrolling to the next document. A private medical report on Rachel obtained illegally from her oncologist's office. They tracked her illness, Ethan. They used it to calculate their liability. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Rachel's death hadn't been just a tragic consequence of Riverwood's pollution. They had monitored her decline, using it to refine their damage control strategy. Ethan stood abruptly, needing to move, to breathe, to process this betrayal. Through the kitchen window, he could see Noah's bedroom, where his son slept peacefully, unaware that his mother's death had been coldly documented by the very people responsible for it. "We're going to make them pay," Maria said, her voice hard with determination. "Every last one of them." When Ethan turned back to the table, his decision was made. "What's the plan?" he asked. Maria's smile was grim. "We give Victor exactly what he wants, a meeting, but on our terms, not his." The three of them spent the next hour developing a strategy for the confrontation at Millhaven Diner. Noah would stay with Maria's teenage daughter, safely away from whatever happened. Maria would coordinate with FBI agents who were already en route from Denver, positioning them strategically around the diner. "You'll both be wearing recording devices," Maria explained. "Every word Hammond says will be captured for evidence. The moment he makes a threat or admits to environmental crimes, we move in." "What if he doesn't say anything incriminating?" Ethan asked. Alex's smile was cold. "Trust me, Victor can't resist explaining how clever he is. It's his greatest weakness." As dawn approached, they finalized the details of their plan. Maria would leave first with Noah, taking him to her home outside town limits. Ethan would go to his scheduled shift at the mill, maintaining the appearance of normalcy. Alex would remain hidden at the house, continuing to analyze the evidence and prepare for the evening confrontation. Before Maria left with a sleepy Noah, she took Ethan aside. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked. "Once we start, there's no going back. Your life in Millhaven will never be the same." Ethan looked toward the box containing Rachel's journals, her final efforts to expose the truth that had ultimately cost her life. "Rachel tried to fight them alone," he said quietly. "I won't make the same mistake." As Noah climbed into Maria's car, clutching his backpack and Mr. Trunk, he looked back at his father with complete trust. "Don't worry, Dad. Angels are watching over us. Mom said so." The simple faith in his son's voice strengthened Ethan's resolve more than any strategic planning could have. Whatever happened tonight, he would make sure Victor Hammond and Riverwood Industries finally faced justice, not just for Rachel, but for every family in Millhaven they had poisoned in the name of profit. Maria made a series of calls from her car before departing, speaking in the clipped professional language of law enforcement. When she hung up, she turned to Ethan and Alex, who stood in the driveway. "I've got 4 FBI agents driving in from Denver," she said. "They'll arrive by late afternoon. 2 more are flying in from Washington, specialists in environmental crimes prosecution." "Will they get here in time?" Alex asked, watching Maria's car disappear around the corner, with Noah safely inside. "They'll be cutting it close," Maria admitted, "which means we need to stall Victor if necessary. Keep him talking as long as possible." When Ethan arrived at the Riverwood Mill for his shift, the massive industrial complex looked different to him now. No longer just a source of employment, but a fortress of corruption and death. The smokestacks belched their usual chemicals into the morning sky, creating a haze that settled over Millhaven like a shroud. His co-workers nodded greetings as he changed into his work uniform, but Ethan found himself studying their faces with new awareness. How many of them were sick without knowing why? How many had lost family members to cancers that weren't random bad luck, but industrial murder? Gary Walsh, his supervisor, approached midway through the shift with a stack of forms. "Need you to sign these safety compliance documents," he said, placing them on Ethan's workstation. "Standard procedure." Ethan glanced at the papers, backdated safety checks and environmental compliance forms. The very kind of falsified documentation Alex had found on her USB drive. "Something wrong?" Gary asked when Ethan hesitated. "No," Ethan replied, signing his name with mechanical precision while his mind cataloged yet another piece of the conspiracy. "Just tired. Noah's been sick." "Sorry to hear that," Gary said, his concerns seemingly genuine. "Kids bounce back fast, though. He'll be good as new in no time." Ethan wondered if Gary knew, if he was an active participant in the cover-up or just another unwitting tool in Victor Hammond's machinery of deception. The rest of his shift passed in a fog of grim determination. Ethan performed his usual tasks while mentally preparing for the confrontation to come. Occasionally, he caught himself looking at the chemical holding tanks and wondering which specific compounds had triggered Rachel's leukemia, which industrial byproducts were even now flowing into Millhaven's water supply. At the end of his shift, Ethan changed back into his civilian clothes and headed for the exit. As he passed the main administrative building, he saw Victor Hammond's luxury sedan parked in its reserved spot, a stark reminder that the architect of Millhaven's suffering was just a few hundred feet away, probably reviewing profit margins while families like Ethan's bore the cost. Back at the house, Alex had transformed the kitchen table into a command center, laptops, documents, and recording equipment carefully arranged. She looked up when Ethan entered, her professional mask momentarily dropping to reveal concern. "How was it?" she asked. "Being there, knowing what we know now?" Ethan set his lunch pail on the counter with deliberate care, like walking through a crime scene where the murder is still in progress. She nodded, understanding without need for further explanation. "Maria called," she said, gesturing to a small black case on the table. "The FBI courier dropped off our recording equipment. We have to be at the diner in 3 hours." They spent those hours reviewing strategy, memorizing key documents they might need to reference, and preparing for various scenarios. Alex was meticulous, anticipating Victor's likely responses and planning counters for each. "He'll try to divide us," she warned. "Offer you your job back with a promotion. Promise to pay for Noah's education. Make it seem like I'm the problem, an outsider stirring up trouble." "I know what Rachel would want me to do too," Ethan replied simply. As the afternoon light began to fade, they prepared to leave for the Millhaven diner. Alex helped Ethan attach the hidden microphone to his shirt collar, a device so small it looked like an ordinary button. "Whatever happens tonight," she said, her fingers lingering on his collar, "thank you for not leaving me tied to that tree." Their eyes met, and for a moment the intensity of their shared purpose created an intimacy that transcended their brief acquaintance. "Let's finish what Rachel started," Ethan said softly. The battle lines were drawn. In 1 hour, they would face Victor Hammond and potentially change the fate of an entire town. The weight of responsibility settled on Ethan's shoulders, not just for Noah's future or Rachel's justice, but for every child in Millhaven who deserved clean water, for every family who deserved the truth. As they drove toward the diner, the last light of day disappeared behind Riverwood's distant smokestacks, and darkness settled over Millhaven once more. The Millhaven diner stood on the corner of Main and Oak, its neon sign casting blue and red reflections across rain-slicked pavement. Monday night brought the usual dinner crowd, mill workers grabbing burgers before night shifts, elderly couples sharing meatloaf specials, teenagers huddled in corner booths over shared milkshakes. None of them aware that tonight, within these vinyl-upholstered walls, a war would be waged for the soul of their town. Ethan and Alex arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, taking a booth near the front windows as instructed. The recording device felt like a burning coal against Ethan's chest, hidden beneath his flannel shirt, but somehow broadcasting its presence in ways only he could feel. Alex sat across from him, outwardly composed in a simple blouse and blazer that looked nothing like the tattered executive suit she'd worn when tied to the tree. Only the fading rope burns on her wrists betrayed the violence she'd recently endured. "He'll be punctual," Alex murmured, her eyes scanning the diner's entrance while she pretended to study the laminated menu. "Military precision. It's part of the image he cultivates." True to her prediction, Victor Hammond's Lincoln Town car pulled into the parking lot at exactly 6:05 p.m. 2 men emerged first, security specialists in expensive suits that failed to disguise their military bearing. They surveyed the diner's layout before opening the rear door for their employer. Victor Hammond entered like a man accustomed to being noticed. Tall and distinguished with silver hair and the kind of tailored suit that spoke of inherited wealth rather than nouveau riche ostentation. His smile revealed perfect teeth as he navigated between tables, nodding cordially to diners who recognized him as Riverwood's CEO and the town's largest employer. Behind his pleasant facade, Ethan detected the predatory focus of a man who viewed people as either assets or obstacles. The same smile that graced company newsletters and charity gala photographs now seemed reptilian, calculated to disarm rather than express genuine warmth. "Mr. Miller, Miss Shea, Victor greeted them, sliding into the booth with easy grace while his security men positioned themselves at adjacent tables. Thank you for meeting me. I trust we can resolve our misunderstanding without further unpleasantness. A waitress approached, and Victor ordered coffee with the casual authority of someone accustomed to immediate service. When she departed, his expression shifted subtly, the corporate mask slipping to reveal something harder beneath. "Where is it?" he asked quietly. Alex placed the USB drive on the table between them, her movements deliberate and controlled. 15 years of evidence, she said calmly. Environmental crimes, bribery, conspiracy to commit fraud. Enough to destroy Riverwood Industries and send you to federal prison for the rest of your life. Victor regarded the small device with surprising equanimity, as if she'd presented nothing more threatening than a business card. He lifted his coffee cup, taking an unhurried sip before responding. Or, he countered, enough to eliminate 2,000 jobs and destroy a community that has depended on this company for 3 generations. The moral complexity of the situation settled over their table like fog, obscuring clear distinctions between right and wrong. Ethan thought of his coworkers, men and women with families and mortgages, who had never asked to be part of an environmental conspiracy. He thought of Mrs. Henderson, whose husband had died of liver cancer after 40 years of loyal service. He thought of Rachel's final warnings about the water supply and her incomplete research that might have prevented other deaths. How many people have to die before profit stops being more important than human life? Ethan asked, his voice low but steady. Victor's mask slipped further, revealing genuine emotion beneath corporate polish. "You think this is about profit?" he asked, leaning forward with intensity that transformed his entire demeanor. "My grandfather built this company during the Great Depression. My father expanded it through 2 recessions and a war. 3 generations of families have depended on Riverwood Industries for their survival." His voice carried the weight of legacy and responsibility that extended beyond simple greed. "I've been trying to transition to sustainable practices for 5 years, but the board of directors threatens to remove me if I admit liability for past environmental damage." "So you hired people to clean up the evidence instead of cleaning up the contamination?" Alex observed. Victor's laugh held no humor. "I hired the best environmental consulting firm in the region to develop a remediation plan that would satisfy federal requirements while maintaining economic viability." He gestured toward Alex with movements that suggested barely controlled frustration. "Your colleague was supposed to provide legal cover for a $50 million cleanup program. Instead, she decided to play hero." The accusation hung between them like a challenge, forcing Alex to defend choices that had led them to this moment. "I found evidence of systematic cover-ups dating back 15 years, Alex replied, her voice steady despite the personal attack. "Falsified environmental reports, bribes to state inspectors, deliberate contamination of public water supplies. That's not transitioning to sustainable practices. That's organized crime." Victor's expression hardened, revealing the steel beneath his corporate polish. "And your solution is to destroy 2,000 jobs and bankrupt the largest employer in 3 counties?" he asked. "What happens to Millhaven when Riverwood Industries closes? Where do those families go? What do they do for work?" The questions pierced through Alex's moral certainty like arrows finding gaps in armor. Ethan watched her struggle with implications that extended beyond corporate malfeasance to encompass human suffering on a community scale. The diner's ambient noise, conversations, and clinking dishes provided surreal background to their life and death negotiation. Victor turned his attention to Ethan, studying him with the calculating gaze of a chess player evaluating an opponent's position. "You have a son, I believe. Noah, isn't it? 8 years old, attends Jefferson Elementary, recently recovered from a fever that kept him hospitalized for 3 days. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. The information was specific, detailed in ways that suggested surveillance rather than casual research. "He collects rocks," Victor continued, his voice deceptively conversational. "Has a stuffed elephant named Mr. Trunk. Still cries for his mother sometimes in the middle of the night." Ethan's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. Victor's intimate knowledge of their lives wasn't just threatening. It was obscene, a violation that transcended corporate intimidation. "You've been watching us," Ethan said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. Victor's smile returned, satisfied that his message had been received. I make it my business to understand potential threats to my company, he replied. Knowledge is power, Mr. Miller. And in this case, it might be the difference between your son growing up with a father or becoming an orphan. The threat was delivered with such casual precision that several seconds passed before Ethan fully processed its implications. Are you threatening my son? He asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Not at all, Victor replied, raising his hands in a gesture of mock innocence. I'm simply pointing out that actions have consequences. Your wife learned that lesson too late. I'd hate to see history repeat itself. The mention of Rachel broke something loose in Ethan's chest, a molten rage that threatened to consume his carefully maintained control. Before he could respond, Alex placed her hand over his beneath the table, a silent reminder of their strategy and the recording device capturing every word. There has to be another way, she said, redirecting the conversation with practiced diplomacy. A solution that protects both the environment and the community. Victor's expression shifted, the predator momentarily replaced by the businessman. Indeed there is, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. The document Victor placed on the table was printed on expensive letterhead and bore the signatures of multiple attorneys. A comprehensive environmental remediation plan, he explained, flipping through pages of technical specifications and financial projections. $50 million invested over 5 years to completely clean up the groundwater contamination. State-of-the-art water treatment facilities for the entire municipal system. Transition to sustainable manufacturing processes that meet or exceed federal environmental standards. The proposal looked impressive, professionally prepared, and seemingly comprehensive. In exchange, Victor continued, all evidence of past environmental irregularities disappears. No prosecutions, no civil lawsuits, no media attention. Alex studied the document with the attention of someone trained to identify legal loopholes in corporate deception. What guarantees do we have that you'll actually implement this program, she asked. Corporate promises aren't exactly known for their reliability. Victor's expression suggested he had anticipated this objection. Independent oversight, he replied. Environmental monitoring by federal agencies, public reporting of progress metrics, financial penalties if timeline targets aren't met. The safeguards seemed reasonable, even generous, but Ethan sensed undercurrents that weren't being addressed directly. And if we refuse? He asked, though the photographs of Noah made the answer obvious. Victor's pleasant mask returned, but his eyes remained cold as Arctic lakes. Then we all lose, he said simply. You lose your jobs, your home, your safety. I lose my company and probably my freedom. Millhaven loses its economic foundation and becomes another Rust Belt ghost town. He leaned back in his booth with the satisfied air of someone who had presented an unassailable argument. Sometimes the choice isn't between good and evil, Mr. Miller. Sometimes it's between and catastrophic. The philosophy felt wrong, but Ethan couldn't immediately identify the flaw in Victor's reasoning. He glanced at Alex, whose face remained carefully neutral as she examined the proposal's details. There are significant problems with this plan, she said finally, tapping a manicured finger against a technical diagram. The proposed filtration system uses outdated technology that would leave several carcinogenic compounds in the water supply. The timeline extends remediation over 5 years, when it could be completed in 2. And there's no provision for medical monitoring of the affected population. Victor's smile never wavered, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. Perfection is the enemy of progress, Ms. Shaw. This plan represents a reasonable compromise between environmental idealism and economic reality. It represents the bare minimum you think you can get away with, Alex countered. These filters would remove visible contaminants, but leave the most dangerous chemicals untouched. It's greenwashing, not remediation. Ethan found himself torn between competing obligations, to Rachel's memory, to Noah's future, to the community that had welcomed them after their loss. If Victor's plan truly was inadequate, accepting it would condemn more families to suffer as theirs had, but rejecting it might destroy the livelihoods of hundreds of innocent workers. What about the people who are already sick? He asked quietly. The families who've lost someone because of the contamination? Do they just get nothing? Victor sighed, as if disappointed by Ethan's failure to grasp the bigger picture. The unfortunate reality is that proving causation in individual cases is virtually impossible. Was your wife's leukemia caused by our facility? Perhaps, or perhaps it was genetics, or random bad luck, or any of a dozen other factors. You knew, Ethan said, remembering the documents Maria had shown them. You had her medical reports. You tracked her illness. Victor's expression betrayed nothing, but his security men shifted slightly, hands moving imperceptibly closer to concealed weapons. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Miller, Victor said softly. One I'd advise you to reconsider making publicly. The tension between them thickened, charged with the potential for violence. In the periphery of his vision, Ethan noticed other diners beginning to sense the discord at their table, conversations faltering as attention shifted toward the confrontation. A shadow fell across their table as one of Victor's security specialists approached. The man whispered something in his employer's ear, words that made Victor's expression shift from confidence to concern. It seems we have unexpected company, he said, glancing toward the diner's front windows, where unmarked police vehicles were positioning themselves in the parking lot. I do hope you haven't done anything precipitous, Alexandra. His tone remained pleasant, but tension radiated from his posture like heat from a furnace. Maria Rodriguez entered through the front door, badge visible on her belt and hand resting casually near her service weapon. Behind her came two men and a woman in dark suits, their bearing unmistakably federal. Victor Hammond, Maria announced, her voice carrying the authority of law enforcement. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit environmental crimes, bribery of public officials, and terroristic threatening. The words triggered immediate chaos as Victor's security team reached for weapons while calculating odds against multiple armed officers. I wouldn't, Maria advised calmly, her own weapon now visible but not yet drawn. FBI Environmental Crimes Unit has been monitoring this location for the past hour. Everyone's movements are being recorded. Victor's face went through several expressions before settling on resigned defeat. Then, without warning, one of his security men, Jenkins, according to his lapel pin, reached into his jacket and pulled out a pistol. The restaurant erupted into screams as customers dove for cover. Jenkins grabbed Alex by the arm, using her as a human shield as he backed toward the kitchen. Nobody moves, he shouted, pressing the gun against Alex's temple. We're walking out the back, and nobody follows. Anyone tries to be a hero, she dies first. Victor seemed as shocked by this development as everyone else. Jenkins, stand down, he ordered, but the security guard ignored him. Sorry, boss, Jenkins said without taking his eyes off Maria, but I don't plan on spending the next 20 years in federal prison. Ethan felt the world slow around him as he watched Alex's face. She wasn't panicking. Instead, her eyes were calculating, assessing, planning. She caught Ethan's gaze and gave an almost imperceptible nod. I said nobody moves, Jenkins shouted as Maria took a single step forward. Nobody's moving, Maria replied, her voice calm and professional. Let's talk about this. You don't want to add kidnapping and assault with a deadly weapon to whatever charges you're already facing. While Jenkins focused on Maria, Alex's hand slowly moved toward the coffee mug on the table. In one fluid motion, she grabbed the mug and smashed it backward into Jenkins' face. The man howled in pain as scalding coffee and ceramic shards struck his eyes. His grip loosened enough for Alex to break free, dropping to the floor as Maria and the FBI agents swarmed in. The second security guard chose that moment to draw his weapon. In the confined space of the diner, the gunshot sounded like cannon fire. A light fixture exploded above their heads, raining glass down on terrified patrons. Before he could fire again, two FBI agents tackled him to the ground. Within seconds, Jenkins was face down on the diner's linoleum floor, handcuffed and bleeding from multiple cuts on his face. The second guard lay subdued nearby, his weapon secured by an agent. Victor Hammond stood perfectly still, hands raised, looking less like a powerful CEO and more like a tired old man watching his life's work crumble around him. It's over, Victor, Alex said quietly as she picked herself up from the floor. You had 15 years to do the right thing. Time's up. The arrest proceeded with professional efficiency that suggested careful planning and coordination. FBI Special Agent Daniels, a serious woman with silver-streaked hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to complex investigations, took custody of the USB drive and Victor's remediation proposal. Evidence in a federal environmental crimes case, she explained to Ethan and Alex. You'll both need to give detailed statements, but for now, you are free to go home. Outside the diner, Ethan found himself shaking with delayed reaction to stress he hadn't fully acknowledged during the confrontation. Alex's hand on his shoulder provided unexpected comfort, warm and steady despite everything they had endured together. It's over, she said quietly, though her expression suggested she didn't entirely believe her own words. Maria approached them with the satisfied air of someone who had successfully executed a complex operation. Victor will be held without bail pending federal charges, she reported. His security team is facing weapons charges and conspiracy counts. The FBI is seizing Riverwood Industries records as we speak. What happens to the company? Ethan asked, thinking of his coworkers who had no knowledge of corporate environmental crimes. What happens to people's jobs? Maria's expression softened with understanding. That's above my pay grade, she admitted. But Agent Daniels mentioned that companies under federal environmental oversight often continue operating while implementing court-mandated cleanup programs. The possibility offered hope, though Ethan suspected the reality would prove more complicated than optimistic projections suggested. And the water contamination? Alex asked. Maria smiled for the first time that evening. Federal oversight means real cleanup, not corporate promises. As they drove to Maria's house to collect Noah, Ethan found himself struggling with conflicting emotions, relief that they had survived, concern for Millhaven's economic future, and a strange sense of purpose he hadn't felt since Rachel's death. Noah was waiting at Maria's front door, Mr. Trunk clutched tightly in his arms. When he saw Ethan's truck pull into the driveway, he raced down the front steps and launched himself into his father's arms. Dad, we made a volcano with baking soda and vinegar, and it exploded all over Maria's daughter's homework. And she wasn't even mad, and we had pizza with extra cheese, and I got to play Minecraft. The stream of excited chatter washed over Ethan like cleansing rain, reminding him of everything he had almost lost. He held his son tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of shampoo and childhood that no amount of money could ever replace. The next morning brought FBI agents to Ethan's door, requesting a formal statement about his interactions with Victor Hammond and knowledge of Riverwood's environmental practices. Agent Daniels conducted the interview at his kitchen table, recording his testimony with professional detachment. We've been investigating Riverwood Industries for nearly a year, she explained as her assistant transcribed Ethan's statement, but we lack sufficient evidence to obtain search warrants for their internal records. The documentation Ms. Shaw provided was the break we needed. Will the plant close? Ethan asked, the question that weighed most heavily on the community's collective mind. Agent Daniels considered her response carefully. Initially, there will be a temporary shutdown while we assess the facility and implement immediate safety measures. After that, operations will likely resume under court supervision with mandated environmental protocols. It wasn't the complete reassurance Ethan had hoped for, but it offered more hope than he'd expected. As the agents prepared to leave, Daniels hesitated at the door. There's something else you should know, she said, her professional demeanor softening slightly. Among the documents we've already reviewed are medical reports dating back 15 years, tracking cancer rates in Millhaven and correlating them with contamination levels. Ethan felt his chest tighten. They knew? Daniels nodded grimly. Hammond didn't just suspect that contamination was causing illness. He had statistical models projecting expected cancer rates based on exposure levels. They calculated the cost of lawsuits versus the cost of cleanup and deliberately chose the former. The revelation struck Ethan like a physical blow. He had assumed corporate negligence, perhaps willful ignorance, but this was something far worse. Cold, calculated sacrifice of human lives for profit margins. These reports go back 15 years, Daniels continued, long before your wife's diagnosis. They knew what would happen, Mr. Miller, and they chose to let it happen. After the agents departed, Ethan sat alone in his kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of breakfast and the weight of new knowledge. The depth of Riverwood's betrayal extended beyond environmental crimes to something approaching premeditated murder. They hadn't just failed to prevent harm, they had measured it, quantified it, and accepted it as a cost of doing business. Alex arrived mid-morning, her professional composure temporarily abandoned in favor of casual jeans and a sweater. She found Ethan still at the kitchen table, staring at a photograph of Rachel that normally sat on the mantel. Agent Daniels told me about the reports, she said softly, taking the chair opposite him. I'm so sorry, Ethan. He looked up, his expression raw with grief newly awakened. They watched her die, he said, his voice barely audible. They watched all of them die, and they did nothing. Alex reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. And now they'll pay for it, she promised. All of them. The evidence is irrefutable. Ethan nodded, drawing strength from her certainty. What happens to you now, he asked, suddenly aware that her mission in Millhaven was effectively complete. I've been asked to stay on as a consultant for the FBI investigation, she replied. They need someone who understands the technical details of the contamination and the corporate structure behind it. The news brought unexpected relief. Though their acquaintance was measured in days rather than months or years, Alex had become an anchor in the storm of revelations and dangers that had upended his life. What about EcoWatch Consulting, he asked. Your senior analyst position in New York? A shadow crossed her face. My relationship with EcoWatch Consulting is complicated at the moment. When I refused to sign off on Victor's remediation plan and went looking for more evidence instead, I did so against direct orders from my superiors. Understanding dawned. They were part of it? Not actively, she clarified, but they weren't willing to jeopardize a $50 million contract by pushing too hard. When I told my director what I'd found, he advised me to be reasonable and accept Victor's proposal. And when you refused? I was placed on administrative leave pending a review of my professional judgment, she said, making air quotes with her fingers. Corporate speak for shut up and play along. The revelation added another layer to Alex's actions. She hadn't just risked her safety by confronting Victor. She'd risked her career and professional reputation. So you're unemployed? Ethan asked, attempting to process this new information. Alex's smile held equal parts bitterness and pride. Technically, I'm on leave. In reality, I expect a termination letter any day now, but I'd make the same choice again. Before Ethan could respond, Noah burst into the kitchen, backpack in hand, ready for school. Dad, we're going to be late. Ms. Peterson says we're learning about the water cycle today, and I want to tell her what Alex taught me about pollution. The enthusiasm in his son's voice created a moment of normalcy amidst chaos, a reminder that life continued its forward momentum even as their world realigned around new truths. I'll take him, Alex offered. You should rest. It's been a long night. Watching them leave together, Noah chattering animatedly about watersheds and rain cycles, Alex responding with patient expertise, Ethan felt an unexpected warmth through his exhaustion. Something was taking shape here. Something he wasn't yet ready to name, but couldn't ignore. Later that day, as news of Victor Hammond's arrest spread through Millhaven, Ethan's phone began ringing with calls from concerned coworkers. The official statement from the FBI was deliberately vague, citing only environmental regulatory violations as the reason for the investigation. But rumors spread like wildfire through the tight-knit community. By afternoon, local news vans had gathered outside the Riverwood facility, where bewildered employees were being turned away by federal agents securing the premises. The town's economic lifeline had been severed without warning, leaving 2,000 workers uncertain about their next paycheck. When Ethan ventured into town for groceries, he felt the weight of stares following him through the aisles. Word had somehow spread about his involvement, transforming him overnight from anonymous newcomer to central figure in Millhaven's unfolding drama. At the checkout, Mrs. Phelps, whose husband supervised the pulping department, refused to meet his eyes as she scanned his items. That'll be $42.76, she said flatly, her usual friendly chatter conspicuously absent. I'm sorry about Joe's job, Ethan offered. The plant will reopen. It's just temporary. Her eyes finally met his, cold with accusation. My husband has worked there for 27 years, she said. We have a mortgage, 2 kids in college. What are we supposed to do until your temporary shutdown ends? The question had no satisfactory answer, and Ethan left the store feeling the dual burden of righteousness and guilt. He had helped expose crimes that had killed his wife and threatened his son, but in doing so, he'd imperiled the livelihoods of people who had committed no crime beyond working for the wrong company. The weekend brought unexpected visitors to Ethan's door, Dr. Sarah Chen from the State University Environmental Sciences Department, accompanied by a younger colleague carrying boxes of research materials. "You must be Ethan Miller," Chen said, extending her hand. "I worked with Rachel on several projects before her illness. When I heard about the Riverwood investigation on the news, I knew we needed to talk." Alex, who had been helping Noah with a science project at the kitchen table, joined them in the living room as Chen unpacked her materials. "Rachel contacted me about 18 months ago," Dr. Chen explained, spreading maps across the coffee table. "She had concerns about contamination patterns in Millhaven's groundwater. We began an informal study, mapping cancer incidents against proximity to industrial sites. The map showed Millhaven and surrounding counties, with colored pins marking cancer diagnoses over a 20-year period. The pattern was unmistakable, a clustering of cases in neighborhoods downstream from the Riverwood facility. Rachel was the first to recognize the statistical anomaly," Dr. Chen continued, her voice softening with remembered admiration. "Even before her own diagnosis, she was gathering evidence, building a case. But without access to Riverwood's internal records, we couldn't prove causation." Ethan stared at the maps, at Rachel's neat handwriting in the margins, the familiar script that had once filled shopping lists and birthday cards, now documenting a deadly pattern she wouldn't live to expose. "She knew," he whispered, touching the paper gently. "She was trying to warn people." "She was brilliant," Dr. Chen affirmed, "and incredibly determined. Even after her diagnosis, she continued collecting data from her hospital bed. She believed Riverwood was deliberately contaminating the water." Alex leaned forward, suddenly alert. "Deliberately? Not just negligent, but intentional?" Dr. Chen nodded grimly. "Rachel's theory was that they were using the municipal water system as an unofficial disposal method for certain chemical byproducts, cheaper than proper treatment and disposal." The revelation shifted their understanding of Riverwood's crimes from corporate negligence to something far more sinister. Not just failing to prevent harm, but actively causing it. "Did she report this to anyone?" Ethan asked, wondering why no action had been taken if Rachel had already identified the problem. Dr. Chen's expression darkened. "She filed reports with the State Environmental Agency, the EPA, even the governor's office. Each time the response was the same. Her evidence was inconclusive. Additional studies were needed. Further review was pending." "They buried it," Alex concluded, "just like they tried to bury my findings." "Precisely," Dr. Chen agreed. "Riverwood's influence extends throughout state government. Campaign contributions, consulting contracts, board positions for retired officials. They've built a protection network that's remarkably effective." As they continued reviewing Rachel's research, Noah wandered into the living room, drawn by the unusual gathering. Dr. Chen smiled at him, her professional demeanor softening. "You must be Noah," she said. "Your mom talked about you all the time. She was very proud of you." Noah approached cautiously, studying the maps with the serious expression he reserved for important matters. "Did you know my mom?" he asked. "I did," Dr. Chen replied. "She was one of the smartest people I've ever known, and very brave." Noah nodded as if this confirmed something he already knew. "She said angels would watch over us," he said solemnly. "I think she sent Alex to help Dad fight the bad water." When the simple statement created a moment of silence, the adults exchanging glances over the boy's head. There was a certain 8-year-old logic to it, Rachel's unfinished work being completed through Alex's intervention, the connection too neat for coincidence, yet too unlikely for design. After Noah returned to his science project, Dr. Chen lowered her voice. "There's something else you should know," she said, pulling a final folder from her box. 2 weeks before she died, Rachel received this. Inside was a letter on Riverwood Industries letterhead, signed by Victor Hammond himself. The language was carefully diplomatic, expressing concerns about potentially defamatory statements and suggesting that continued pursuit of unsubstantiated claims could have serious professional and personal consequences. "A threat," Ethan said, the paper trembling in his hands. "Carefully worded legal intimidation," Dr. Chen corrected. But Rachel understood the implication. "She told me she was afraid, not for herself but for you and Noah." The knowledge that Rachel had faced her final battle alone, protecting her family by keeping them ignorant of the danger, added another dimension to Ethan's grief. She had carried this burden silently, shielding him even as her body failed. When Dr. Chen departed, leaving Rachel's research materials with them, Ethan found himself standing at the kitchen window, watching Noah play in the backyard. The boy had Rachel's inquisitive nature, her stubborn determination to understand the world, qualities that might have been dangerous inheritances in a town controlled by Riverwood Industries. Alex joined him at the window, her shoulder brushing his as they watched Noah examining stones with his magnifying glass. "She was extraordinary," Alex said softly. "To fight them while fighting cancer, that takes incredible courage." "She always was the stronger one," Ethan admitted. "Even in those final months during the 10 months since she's been gone, I still didn't fully understand what she was facing, any of it. I thought the environmental stuff was just work, and the cancer was just bad luck." "You couldn't have known," Alex reassured him. "They made sure of that." Ethan turned to face her, suddenly aware of how comfortable her presence had become in such a short time. "Thank you," he said simply, "for finishing what she started." Alex's eyes met his, holding something warm but cautious. "It's not finished yet," she replied, "but we're getting there." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibilities neither was ready to acknowledge. Then Noah's voice called from the yard. Dad, Alex, come see this weird bug I found." And the spell broke, leaving whatever might have been said for another time. In the days that followed, Millhaven divided along increasingly hostile lines. Those directly affected by Riverwood's closure, employees and their families, local businesses dependent on worker spending, viewed Ethan with barely concealed animosity. Twice he found his truck vandalized in parking lots, anonymous notes left on the windshield calling him a traitor and job killer. But others approached him quietly, often in grocery store aisles or gas stations, to whisper thanks and share stories of family members lost to mysterious cancers. Mrs. Henderson brought a casserole and tearfully recounted her husband's painful final months. The high school science teacher offered to tutor Noah for free, explaining that his sister had died of the same leukemia that took Rachel. The dichotomy of reactions reflected Millhaven's impossible position, a town forced to choose between economic survival and physical health, between paychecks and cancer rates, with no middle ground in sight. 3 months after Victor Hammond's arrest, Riverwood Industries remained shuttered. The promised temporary closure had extended through fall and into winter, with no reopening date announced. Federal investigators maintained their presence, converting the administrative offices into a field headquarters for what had become one of the largest environmental crime investigations in state history. For Ethan, the shutdown brought immediate financial hardship. His modest savings, already depleted by Rachel's medical bills, dwindled rapidly as he sought alternative employment. The local job market, dependent on Riverwood's economic engine, offered few opportunities. He found occasional construction work and weekend shifts at a warehouse 2 towns over, but barely enough to cover mortgage payments and groceries. Many families face similar or worse circumstances. The town's food bank, normally serving a few dozen households, now struggled to feed hundreds. The school reported increasing numbers of children arriving hungry, their parents' unemployment benefits insufficient to stretch through the month. By Christmas, for sale signs decorated front lawns throughout Millhaven, as families surrendered to economic reality and sought opportunities elsewhere. Through it all, Alex remained. Though offered consulting positions with environmental firms in Boston and Washington, she chose to stay in Millhaven, serving as liaison between the community and the federal investigation. She had moved from Ethan's garage to a small apartment downtown, but spent most evenings at their kitchen table, helping Noah with homework or discussing case developments with Ethan. Their relationship evolved with careful deliberation, neither willing to rush what was growing between them. They were bound by shared purpose and danger, by Noah's increasing attachment to Alex, and by the shadow of Rachel that both honored and complicated their connection. On a snowy January morning, as Ethan cleared the driveway before driving Noah to school, Agent Daniel's government sedan pulled up alongside the curb. "Mr. Miller," she called, emerging with a manila envelope in hand, "we have news." Inside, over coffee at the kitchen table, she spread photographs showing a fleet of trucks entering the Riverwood facility. "Equipment for the mandated water treatment system," she explained. "The first phase of court-ordered remediation." "They're reopening the plant?" Ethan asked, hope and apprehension mingling in his voice. "Not exactly," Daniels replied. Riverwood Industries no longer exists as a corporate entity. The federal court has approved its sale to Green Solutions Incorporated, a company specializing in environmental remediation and sustainable manufacturing. The news hit like a thunderclap, unexpected and transformative. For months, Millhaven had existed in limbo, its economic future suspended between Riverwood's criminal past and an uncertain future. This represented something neither Ethan nor the community had dared to hope for, not just regulation of the existing polluter, but its complete replacement. What does that mean for the workers, he asked, the question that would echo through every household in town. Green Solutions has committed to rehiring at least 70% of Riverwood's workforce, Daniels explained. They're converting the facility to produce recycled paper products and water filtration systems. Some positions will require retraining, but the company has pledged to provide that at no cost to employees. Ethan sat back, processing the implications. And the contamination? Full remediation of the groundwater system over the next 18 months, Daniel said, satisfaction evident in her voice. State-of-the-art filtration for the municipal water supply, soil decontamination, and a health monitoring program for affected residents. It was more than they had dared hope for, not just a patch on a broken system, but a complete transformation. Millhaven would not just survive, it might emerge as a model for industrial rehabilitation. There's something else, Daniels added, sliding a business card across the table. The new operations director at Green Solutions asked me to give you this. They're looking for a facilities supervisor with knowledge of the existing plant. The position comes with a substantial salary increase over your previous role. Ethan stared at the card, struggling to process this latest development. After months of financial uncertainty and community ostracism, to be offered not just employment but advancement seemed almost too fortunate to trust. Why me, he asked finally. Half the town blames me for the shutdown. There are people with more seniority, more experience. Daniel's expression softened slightly. The new management values integrity above experience, Mr. Miller. You were willing to sacrifice your job to protect this community. That's exactly the kind of leadership they want in supervisory positions. After Daniels departed, Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table, turning the business card over in his hands. The promise of financial security after months of struggle was tempting, but something about the timing felt almost too perfect, as if the universe were offering compensation for all they had endured. When Alex arrived that evening, he shared the news, watching her face carefully for reaction. Green Solutions, she repeated, recognition flickering in her eyes. They're legitimate, one of the few environmental remediation firms with a solid track record. I've reviewed some of their projects in New England. They actually deliver what they promise. And the job offer, Waddy asked, still uncertain. Alex hesitated, choosing her words carefully. It makes sense, she said finally. They need people who understand the facility, but aren't compromised by loyalty to the old management. You're an obvious choice. Ethan nodded, her assessment aligning with his own analysis. What about you, he asked. Will you stay now that the investigation is winding down? The question carried weight beyond professional curiosity, touching on possibilities neither had fully articulated. I've been offered a position too, she admitted, environmental compliance director for the new facility. Essentially, I'd be responsible for ensuring they actually implement all the protections they've promised. You're considering it? Ethan asked, surprising himself with how much her answer mattered. Alex's gaze met his, steady and honest. I am. I've spent my career consulting on environmental problems, then moving on to the next crisis. This would be different, staying in one place, seeing a project through from damage to healing. The implications hung between them, not just professional opportunity, but personal commitment to Millhaven, to its recovery, and perhaps to the connections she had formed here. Noah would be thrilled, Ethan said, offering the safest expression of his own hopes. Alex's smile acknowledged what remained unspoken. I've grown rather attached to him too, she replied. To both of you, actually. Before Ethan could respond, his phone rang, the school principal calling with unexpected news that demanded immediate attention. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, a tentative step toward possibilities that extended beyond professional collaboration. The following week, Green Solutions officially announced its acquisition of the former Riverwood facility and plans for its transformation into what they termed an environmental manufacturing center. Town hall meetings were held to explain the transition process, introduce new management, and outline hiring procedures for former employees. Initial skepticism gave way to cautious optimism as details emerged. The new operation would produce recycled paper products and water filtration systems, with plans to expand into solar panel components within 5 years. Wages would match or exceed previous rates, with improved healthcare benefits that specifically covered conditions potentially linked to chemical exposure. Most significant for the community was the announcement of the Millhaven Restoration Fund, a court-mandated program that would provide medical monitoring and financial assistance to families affected by the contamination. The fund, established with penalties assessed against Riverwood and personally against Victor Hammond, represented acknowledgement of suffering that had previously been denied. For families like Mrs. Henderson's, who had lost loved ones to industrial-caused cancers, the fund offered both practical support and moral vindication. Their losses were no longer dismissed as statistical anomalies or unfortunate coincidences, but recognized as direct consequences of corporate crimes. As February ended, the first phase of the water treatment system came online, filtering Millhaven's municipal supply through processes that removed the contaminants Rachel had identified in her research. Families that had relied on bottled water for years cautiously began using their taps, testing agencies confirming purity levels that exceeded federal standards. Ethan accepted the position at Green Solutions, beginning work in early March as the facility prepared for limited reopening. His new role came with both increased responsibility and the opportunity to implement safety protocols that would have been dismissed under previous management. On his first day entering through the same gates where he had once worked 12-hour shifts operating machinery, he felt the weight of transformation, not just of the facility, but of his own journey from worker to whistleblower to leader. The administrative offices had been completely renovated, Hammond's executive suite converted into a monitoring center, where real-time data from water and air quality sensors throughout the facility was continuously displayed. The company's commitment to transparency extended to a public website where community members could access the same environmental readings, ensuring accountability through visibility. As he settled into his new office, modest but considerably more comfortable than the break room where Hammond had once threatened him, Ethan found himself reflecting on the improbable path that had brought him here. From discovering Alex tied to a tree to helping transform an environmental disaster into a model of industrial rehabilitation, none of it would have seemed possible 6 months earlier. A knock at his open door interrupted his thoughts. Alex stood in the doorway, a cardboard box in her arms and a tentative smile on her face. "First day too?" he asked, noting the box that presumably contained her office supplies. She nodded, entering to set the box on his desk. "Environmental Compliance Director, reporting for duty. They've put me right down the hall from you." "Keeping an eye on me already?" he teased, the easy rapport they'd developed over months of crisis now transitioning to professional collaboration. "Always," she replied with mock seriousness. "I trust you, Ethan Miller, but I'm still going to verify your environmental compliance." Their laughter felt like release after months of tension and uncertainty. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them from a position of newfound strength, both personal and institutional. As they stood together at the window overlooking the facility where construction teams were installing solar panels on the south-facing roof, Ethan felt something settle within him. Not completion or resolution, but the beginning of a new chapter. Rachel's fight had been continued and won. Noah's future in Millhaven would include clean water and safe air, and Ethan himself had found purpose and connection he had thought lost forever. "It's really happening," Alex said softly, watching workers below unload filtration equipment from Green Solutions trucks. "We're actually fixing it." "Thanks to you," Ethan replied. "If you hadn't refused to sign off on Hammond's fake remediation plan, if you hadn't gathered the evidence, even when it put you in danger." Alex shook her head, interrupting his tribute. "Thanks to Rachel," she corrected gently. "She started this fight long before I arrived. I just helped finish what she began." The acknowledgement of Rachel's role, not as competitor for Ethan's affection, but as catalysts for the transformation they were witnessing, created a moment of perfect understanding between them. Before they could continue, Ethan's phone chimed with a text message. It was from Noah, sent during his lunch break at school. Dad, Ms. Peterson says our water testing kit shows the cleanest water she's ever seen in Millhaven. Can we tell Alex when she comes for dinner tonight? Ethan showed the message to Alex, whose smile reflected his own sense of accomplishment and hope. The simple joy of a child excited about clean water measurements captured everything they had fought for, not just environmental remediation, but restoration of innocence and safety. Looks like we have something to celebrate tonight, Alex said, her eyes meeting his with warmth that extended beyond professional satisfaction. Ethan nodded, allowing himself to imagine possibilities that had seemed impossible in the dark days after Rachel's death. I think we do, he agreed. I think we have quite a lot to celebrate. As they walked together toward the facility's cafeteria for lunch, Ethan noticed the snow beginning to melt from the factory grounds, revealing the first tentative green shoots of spring beneath. Like Millhaven itself, they were emerging from a long winter into the promise of renewal. Fan tu của câu chuyện Hidden Waters đã được hoàn thành với 7 số máy bám sát outline đã cung cấp. Tôi đã đảm bảo các yếu tố sau. 1. Đã bao gồm đầy đủ các chương theo outline. Chương 6, cuộc gặp tại quán ăn, với twist number 4, khi Victor tiết lộ biết quá nhiều về Ethan và Noah. Chương 7, bày giang sàn, với climax number 3, khi có tình huống con tin với súng. Chương 8, những bí mật được phơi bày, với twist number 5, khi FBI phát hiện Victor đã che giấu báo cáo y tế. Chương 9, tiếng vọng từ quá khứ, với sự xuất hiện của Dr. Strachan và hồ sơ của Rachel. Chương 10, thủy triều đảo ngược, với climax number 4, khi có tin về Riverwood Industries được bán cho Green Solutions 2. Đã phát triển mối quan hệ giữa các nhân vật một cách tự nhiên. Ethan và Alex tiến triển từ đồng minh trong khủng hoảng đến gần gũi hơn, nhưng vẫn giữ khoảng cách phù hợp. Noah và Alex phát triển mối quan hệ tự nhiên, với Noah xem Alex như người thân. Cộng đồng Millhaven chia rẽ trong phản ứng với sự thật. Đã thêm các xung đột và giải pháp phức tạp. Xung đột giữa bảo vệ môi trường và việc làm trong cộng đồng. Phản ứng trái chiều từ người dân Millhaven, giải pháp của Green Solutions mang tính thực tế và cân bằng 4. Đã đưa vào các yếu tố phù hợp với đối tượng độc nam giới Mỹ trên 50 tuổi. Nhấn mạnh giá trị gia đình và bảo vệ con cái. Xây dựng các xung đột đạo đức phức tạp liên quan đến trách nhiệm cộng đồng. Tạo một nhân vật nam chính đối mặt với thử thách và phát triển trưởng thành. Fan này đã đạt nền móng vững chắc cho phần 2, nơi câu chuyện sẽ đi đến kết thúc với sự tái sinh của Millhaven và gia đình Ethan. 6 months after Victor Hammond's arrest, Millhaven had begun to transform. The faded Riverwood Industries sign that had loomed over the town for decades had been replaced with the sleek green and blue logo of Green Solutions, Inc. Where smokestacks had once belched chemical-laden clouds into the air, new filtration systems now captured and processed emissions, releasing only wisps of clean vapor. Inside the facility, the changes were even more dramatic. Production floors that had once housed pulping equipment now contained state-of-the-art recycling systems. The chemical storage areas had been completely redesigned with triple containment safeguards and real-time monitoring. Most significantly, a massive water treatment complex now occupied the southern end of the property, filtering not only the facility's output, but the town's entire municipal water supply. For Ethan Miller, the transformation mirrored his own journey. From night shift machine operator to environmental operations supervisor, a title that still felt strange on his office door. His new position came with responsibilities he would never have imagined a year earlier, overseeing water quality monitoring, coordinating with EPA inspectors, and managing a team of 20 technicians dedicated to ensuring environmental compliance. The salary increase had allowed him to move Noah from their small rental into a modest but comfortable house near Jefferson Elementary, with a proper yard where the boy could play without fear of contaminated soil. More importantly, it provided security after months of financial uncertainty that had followed Riverwood's closure. On a warm August morning, Ethan stood in his new office, reviewing water quality reports from the previous week. Each chart showed contaminant levels well below federal guidelines, in most cases undetectable by standard testing methods. Clean water, flowing through Millhaven's pipes for the first time in decades. A knock at his door interrupted his review. Michael Chen, Green Solutions CEO, entered with a visitor in tow, a distinguished older man in an expensive suit who seemed vaguely familiar. Ethan, Chen greeted him warmly. I'd like you to meet Senator James Hartwell. He's touring the facility as part of the Congressional Environmental Oversight Committee. Ethan shook the senator's hand, placing the familiar face. He'd seen him on news programs discussing environmental regulations, usually arguing for stronger protections against industry opposition. Mr. Miller, the senator said, his grip firm, I've heard a great deal about you. Your courage in bringing Riverwood's crimes to light has been an inspiration to whistleblowers across the country. The praise still felt uncomfortable. Ethan had never seen himself as a whistleblower or environmental crusader, just a father trying to protect his son and honor his wife's memory. Thank you, Senator, but I was just doing what anyone would do in my position. The senator's smile suggested he knew better. Very few people would risk their livelihood and safety the way you did, Mr. Miller, which is why I'm particularly interested in your perspective on our new regulatory framework. For the next hour, Ethan guided the senator through the facility, explaining the monitoring systems, redundant safeguards, and community oversight committees that had been established. As they walked, he noticed something that still surprised him daily, the absence of the chemical smell that had once permeated the plant. Instead, the air carried only the clean scent of recycled paper and filtered water. Remarkable transformation, Senator Hartwell commented as they completed the tour. From environmental disaster to national model in less than a year. The Millhaven Protocol, as we're calling it in Washington, is already influencing legislation for similar facilities nationwide. The idea that Millhaven, their small, forgotten town, was now shaping national policy seemed almost too improbable to believe. Yet the evidence surrounded them in concrete and steel, in purified water and cleaner air. After the senator departed, Ethan checked his watch and realized he was running late for his next appointment. He hurried across the campus to the Environmental Compliance Building, where Alexandra Shaw was waiting in her office. Alex had changed in subtle ways during the past 6 months. The corporate polish remained, but she moved with the relaxed confidence of someone who had found her place rather than someone still climbing a career ladder. Her office reflected this evolution, professional but personalized with framed photographs of Millhaven landscapes and, Ethan noticed with a warm feeling, several pictures of Noah from their various outings. Sorry I'm late, he said, entering without knocking, a familiarity that had developed naturally between them. Senator Hartwell wanted the grand tour. Alex looked up from her computer, smiling in a way that still made his heart skip slightly. I met him earlier. Impressive man. Actually seems to care about environmental policy beyond the photo opportunities. He mentioned something called the Millhaven Protocol. Apparently we're famous in Washington. More than you know, Alex replied, sliding a folder across her desk. EPA just published their quarterly review of our operation. We're officially the cleanest paper production facility in the country, possibly the world. Ethan flipped through the report, pride mixing with vindication. The numbers represented not just regulatory compliance but moral victory, proof that Rachel's fight and their subsequent sacrifices had mattered. Have you made your decision? He asked, setting down the folder and addressing the question that had hovered between them for weeks. Alex's expression turned thoughtful. EcoWatch Consulting had finally acknowledged her vindication in the Riverwood case and offered her a promotion to senior director position in their New York headquarters, a career-making opportunity that would place her among the top environmental consultants in the country. I have, she said, her blue eyes meeting his directly. I'm staying in Millhaven. Green Solutions has created a permanent environmental director position, and I've accepted it. The news brought a relief Ethan hadn't realized he'd been holding until it rushed out of him. Though neither had spoken explicitly about the personal dimension of her potential departure, both understood that more than professional collaboration was at stake. Noah will be thrilled, he said, offering the safest expression of his own feelings. Alex's smile suggested she understood what remained unspoken. Just Noah? Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Noah's school, a reminder about tomorrow's science fair where Noah would be presenting his water quality project. The moment of personal vulnerability passed, but something had shifted subtly between them. Another small step toward possibilities neither was quite ready to name. Speaking of Noah, Alex said, I got the test results back from those water samples he collected for his science project. They're perfect, not a trace of the chemicals that used to be in the groundwater. He'll be insufferable when he hears that, Ethan laughed. Already thinks he's the next great environmental scientist. He might be, Alex said seriously. He has Rachel's analytical mind and your determination. Pretty formidable combination. The mention of Rachel no longer brought the sharp pain it once had. Grief had softened into something more complex, a bittersweet recognition that she remained part of their story even as new chapters were being written. As they walked together to the cafeteria for lunch, Alex updated him on the latest developments in the ongoing legal proceedings against Riverwood's former executives. Hammond's attorneys have been in negotiation with federal prosecutors all week, she said. Rumor has it he's looking for a plea deal. After everything he did, he deserves to spend the rest of his life in prison. Alex nodded, understanding. Morally, yes. Practically, the prosecution might be willing to reduce charges in exchange for testimony against the board of directors. They were the ones who repeatedly vetoed his attempts to implement environmental safeguards, according to the documents we found. Ethan considered this new perspective. You think he was telling the truth about that? That he actually wanted to clean things up but was overruled? Partially, Alex qualified. The evidence suggests he did propose remediation plans several times over the past 5 years, but he also actively participated in the cover-up for a decade before that. Complex man, complex situation. Before they could discuss further, Ethan's phone rang. The courthouse number appeared on his screen, and he answered with apprehension. Court communications rarely brought good news. Mr. Miller, this is Judith Winters from the U.S. Ediso Attorney's Office. I'm calling to inform you that Victor Hammond has agreed to plead guilty to all environmental charges in exchange for his testimony against Riverwood's board of directors and certain state regulatory officials. The news stunned Ethan into momentary silence. Hammond, and the architect of Millhaven's suffering and Rachel's death, was turning on his co-conspirators. When, he managed finally, he's giving his formal statement now. The plea will be entered tomorrow morning. As a key witness in the case, you're entitled to attend if you wish. After ending the call, Ethan relayed the development to Alex, whose expression mirrored his own mixture of vindication and lingering anger. This changes everything, she said. With Hammond's testimony, they can prosecute the entire corporate structure that enabled the contamination. Not just Riverwood, but the regulatory agencies that looked the other way. Ethan nodded, processing the implications. Rachel would have wanted that. Systemic change, not just punishing one man. As they parted ways at the cafeteria door, Ethan found himself reflecting on the past year's journey, from discovering Alex tied to a tree to rebuilding their community from environmental disaster. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but standing amid the transformation of both the facility and the town, he could finally see the shape of justice emerging from years of corruption and pain. Noah was waiting at the school gate when Ethan arrived for pickup, bursting with excitement about his science project and the upcoming fair. As they drove home, the boy chattered about water pH levels and contaminant testing methods with an enthusiasm that reminded Ethan painfully of Rachel. Same analytical mind, same passionate concern for environmental health, a legacy more meaningful than any inheritance. Dad, can Alex come to dinner tonight? I want to show her my display before tomorrow. She helped me with the graphs, so it's kind of her project too. The casual way Noah had integrated Alex into their daily lives still amazed Ethan. Children adapted with a flexibility adults could only envy, finding room in their hearts without the complications of guilt or uncertainty that plague grown-up relationships. I'll ask her, Ethan promised, but she might be busy with work tonight. Noah's confidence was unshaken. She'll come. She always comes when I ask. The simple observation carried a truth Ethan couldn't deny. Despite her demanding schedule and professional responsibilities, Alex had never once refused Noah's invitations. Whether for homework help, weekend hikes, or impromptu stargazing sessions on clear nights. She had become a constant in their lives without fanfare or declaration, filling spaces neither had realized were empty. That evening, as the three of them sat around the dinner table reviewing Noah's science project, Ethan marveled at how naturally they had become a unit. Alex helping Noah refine his presentation, the boy soaking up her expertise with adoration. Ethan watching them both with a growing certainty that some journeys, however painfully they begin, lead exactly where they're meant to. The federal courthouse in Lansing sat like a marble fortress among more modest government buildings. Its imposing columns and soaring dome were designed to inspire respect for the law. Today, they would witness its application to those who had considered themselves above it. Ethan sat in the gallery beside Alex, watching as Victor Hammond entered his formal guilty plea. The former CEO looked diminished in his tailored suit without cufflinks or tie, security precautions for a man now officially a federal prisoner. Yet he maintained the straight-back posture and direct gaze that had once commanded boardrooms and intimidated employees. "How do you plead to the charges?" Judge Carrington asked after the lengthy indictment had been read. Hammond's voice carried clearly through the hushed courtroom. "Guilty, Your Honor, to all charges." A murmur ran through the gallery, mostly Millhaven residents who had traveled to witness this moment of accountability. Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes 2 rows behind Ethan. The Pattersons, whose daughter had died of the same rare leukemia as Rachel, clasped hands tightly. For these families and dozens more, Hammond's admission represented acknowledgement of suffering long denied. The proceedings continued with Hammond's agreement to testify against his former board members and regulatory officials who had enabled Riverwood's environmental crimes. In exchange, prosecutors would recommend a sentence of 15 years rather than the potential life imprisonment the charges carried. "The defendant will be remanded to federal custody until sentencing," Judge Carrington announced, bringing the hearing to a close with a sharp rap of her gavel. As they exited the courthouse, reporters swarmed around Ethan and Alex, thrusting microphones forward and shouting questions. The case had attracted national attention as one of the most significant environmental prosecutions in decades. "Mr. Miller, how do you feel about Hammond's plea deal?" "Ms. Shaw, will you continue to pursue civil penalties against former board members? Do you believe justice has been served for the victims in Millhaven?" Alex fielded the questions with practiced diplomacy, while Ethan stood uncomfortably in the spotlight he had never sought. He was saved from further interrogation by Maria Rodriguez, who appeared at his elbow and skillfully extracted them from the media scrum. "Vultures," she muttered as they reached the parking garage. "They want sound bites, not real answers." Maria had been promoted to sheriff following the revelation that her predecessor had accepted bribes from Riverwood to ignore environmental complaints. The new badge suited her, authority she had earned through integrity rather than political connections. "Hammond gave his first detailed statement yesterday," she informed them as they walked. "Name names, dates, specific decisions. It's devastating testimony, not just against Riverwood, but against 3 former state environmental officials and 2 EPA regulators who helped bury violations." "Will it be enough?" Ethan asked, thinking of the families who had lost loved ones. Maria's expression was grimly satisfied. "More than enough. The U.S. Attorney is already preparing indictments. This goes beyond corporate misconduct into conspiracy and possibly criminal negligence resulting in death." The validation of Rachel's suspicions and their subsequent investigation should have brought unalloyed satisfaction, but Ethan found his emotions more complex. Justice was being served, yet nothing could restore what had been taken, not just from his family, but from an entire community that had trusted institutions meant to protect them. 2 weeks later, Alex took the witness stand in the federal case against Riverwood's board of directors. Though Hammond's testimony had provided the framework, Alex's technical expertise was crucial in explaining how the contamination had occurred and been systematically concealed. For 6 hours, she methodically detailed the falsified reports, manipulated testing protocols, and deliberately misleading statements that had enabled 15 years of groundwater pollution. Her testimony, delivered with professional precision and moral clarity, transformed complex environmental science into damning evidence that even the defense attorneys struggled to challenge. When she returned to Millhaven that evening, exhausted but vindicated, Ethan was waiting at her apartment with dinner prepared and a bottle of wine. "You were magnificent," he said, having watched portions of her testimony on the courthouse livestream. "Even I understood the chemistry, and I barely passed high school science." Alex smiled tiredly, accepting the glass he offered. Hammond's lawyers were there watching. "I think they're nervous about how effective his testimony will be if I could make such an impact as a technical witness." They settled on her small balcony overlooking Millhaven's main street, where the evening farmers market, was winding down. Below, townspeople moved among stalls of local produce and crafts. A community slowly healing, finding its way back to normalcy after months of economic hardship and environmental fear. Dr. Chen called today, Ethan said after a comfortable silence. She's been reviewing Rachel's medical records as part of the compensation claims process. Alex set down her glass, instantly alert despite her fatigue. Did she find something? Rachel had been documenting her own symptoms for months before her diagnosis, correlating them with water quality measurements she was taking secretly. She suspected what was happening to her but couldn't prove it without access to Riverwood's internal data. The revelation added another layer to Rachel's courage, fighting not just for her community, but with the terrible knowledge that the same contamination was likely killing her. She tried to warn her doctors, Ethan continued, his voice thick with emotion. The medical records show she repeatedly suggested environmental testing, but they dismissed her concerns as anxiety. By the time they diagnosed the leukemia, it was already advanced. Alex reached across the small table, covering his hand with hers. She was extraordinary, Ethan. To keep fighting when she must have been terrified. That was Rachel, he said softly. Never gave up when she believed in something. The moment held echoes of grief, but also something new. Admiration untainted by guilt. Remembrance without debilitating pain. Rachel's memory had become less a wound than a foundation upon which something new could be built. As summer transitioned to fall, the legal proceedings against Riverwood's former leadership continued. Hammond's testimony proved devastating, revealing a corporate culture that had prioritized profit over human lives with calculated precision. Board minutes detailed explicit decisions to conceal contamination data, bribe officials, and intimidate potential whistleblowers, including surveillance of Rachel Miller in the months before her diagnosis. The community of Millhaven, initially divided between those who blamed Ethan and Alex for the mill's closure and those who championed their courage, began to reconcile as the full truth emerged. Even former Riverwood loyalists found their position untenable when confronted with evidence that their employer had knowingly endangered their families. Green Solutions' continued investment in the town helped heal these divisions. As promised, they rehired most of Riverwood's workforce, providing training for new production methods and improved safety protocols. The facility's transformation from polluter to environmental leader brought national attention and new economic opportunities to a town that had nearly collapsed. For Ethan and Alex, the months of testimony and legal proceedings created a shared purpose that deepened their connection beyond crisis response. Professional collaboration evolved into genuine partnership, and their careful restraint gradually yielded to growing certainty that what existed between them deserved exploration. On a crisp October evening, as they walked home from Noah's school play, the boy raced ahead to examine something interesting on the sidewalk, giving them a rare moment alone. He asked me something interesting today, Alex said, watching Noah crouch to inspect what appeared to be an unusual rock. He wanted to know if I was going to be his new mom. Ethan nearly stumbled mid-step. What did you tell him? That it wasn't my decision to make, she replied, her eyes meeting his directly. That you and he would need to figure that out together. Yes, the statement hung between them, neither a declaration nor a retreat, but an acknowledgement of possibilities that had remained unspoken for too long. And if it were your decision? Ethan asked, his heart racing with a nervousness he hadn't felt since high school. Alex's smile held both warmth and challenge. I think you know the answer to that, Ethan Miller. I've been part of this family in everything but name for months now. Before he could respond, Noah called excitedly for them to see his discovery. Not a rock after all, but a small turtle making its slow way across the sidewalk. The moment passed, but something fundamental had shifted between them. A threshold crossed without ceremony but with perfect clarity. That night, after Noah was asleep, they sat on Ethan's porch swing, the conversation continuing without awkwardness or uncertainty. I've been afraid, Ethan admitted, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. Afraid of dishonoring Rachel's memory. Afraid of risking what we already have. Afraid Noah might get hurt if things didn't work out. I know, Alex said simply. I've had the same fears. Plus wondering if I was just a substitute, a convenient replacement. The honesty between them felt like freedom. Concerns acknowledged rather than hidden. Vulnerabilities shared rather than protected. You could never be a replacement, Ethan said firmly. What I feel for you is entirely its own thing, different from what Rachel and I had, but just as real. Alex leaned against him, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder as if it had always belonged there. So where does that leave us? Ethan's arms settled around her shoulders, the gesture somehow both new and familiar. Moving forward, he said. Carefully, respectfully, but definitely forward. The decision once made felt not like a dramatic leap, but like recognition of a path they had already been walking together, a natural progression from allies to friends, to something deeper that had been forming beneath the surface of their daily interactions. 1 year after Victor Hammond's arrest, Millhaven held a community celebration, marking the official completion of the water remediation project. The town square had been transformed with banners and booths showcasing the transformation, before and after water samples, timelines of the cleanup process, and educational displays about environmental protection. Ethan, Noah, and Alex moved among the festivities, stopping frequently to chat with neighbors and former coworkers. The hostility that had once followed Ethan through town had dissipated as economic recovery took hold, and the full extent of Riverwood's crimes became public knowledge. Mr. Miller, Mrs. Henderson called, waving from the memorial booth where photographs of those lost to contamination-related illnesses were displayed. We've added Rachel's picture. I hope that's all right. The memorial had been Mrs. Henderson's project, a way to ensure the human cost of corporate malfeasance would not be forgotten even as the town moved forward. Rachel's photograph, taken on a hiking trip shortly before her diagnosis, showed her smiling beside a mountain stream, a painfully fitting image for a woman who had fought for clean water. She would have been honored, Ethan assured Mrs. Henderson, his throat tight with emotion. After the community celebration, Ethan and Noah visited Rachel's grave, bringing fresh flowers and news of Millhaven's transformation. It had become a monthly ritual, not mournful pilgrimages, but conversational visits where Noah would update his mother on school projects, and Ethan would share community developments. "The water's clean now, Mom," Noah told the granite headstone with childish directness. "Like really clean. You can't even find the chemicals with special tests. And I got an A+ on my science project about water filtration. Alex helped me, but I did most of it myself." Ethan smiled at his son's earnest reporting, adding his own silent communication with Rachel, gratitude for her courage, for the son who carried her spirit, for the foundation she had built that allowed them to move forward without forgetting. As they walked back to the turn, Noah grew uncharacteristically thoughtful. "Dad, do you think Mom would like Alex?" The question caught Ethan off guard, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Children had an uncanny ability to address directly what adults carefully circled. "I think she would," he answered honestly. "They're similar in some ways. Both smart, determined, passionate about doing the right thing." Noah nodded, satisfied with this assessment. "That's what I think too. And Mom would want us to be happy, right? That's what you always tell me." "She absolutely would," Ethan confirmed, marveling at his son's straightforward wisdom. That evening, they joined Alex for dinner at Millhaven's newly opened Riverside restaurant, a symbol of the town's economic rebirth. As they waited for dessert, Alex shared news of her latest job offer. "Stanford Environmental Law Center," she announced. "They want me to head their industrial compliance division. Prestigious position, significant salary increase, opportunity to shape national policy." Ethan felt his heart sink despite his determination to support whatever decision she made. "California's a long way from Millhaven," he observed, striving for neutrality. Alex's smile suggested she had expected this reaction. "It is, which is why I declined the offer this morning." "You did?" Noah interjected before Ethan could respond. "You're staying with us." "If that's still what you both want," she replied, her eyes meeting Ethan's with a question that went beyond professional decisions. "It is," Ethan said firmly, reaching for her hand across the table. "Very much so." The simple exchange marked another milestone in their carefully navigated journey, a deliberate choice of shared future over individual opportunity, of connection over career advancement. Noah's delighted grin suggested complete approval of this development. "Does this mean you guys are going to get married?" he asked with characteristic directness. Both adults laughed, tension breaking. "One step at a time, buddy," Ethan advised. "But Alex isn't going anywhere. That's what matters right now." Later, walking along Millhaven's newly developed Riverside Park, Alex elaborated on her decision. It wasn't really a difficult choice, she admitted. A year ago, I might have jumped at the Stanford position. Career advancement was everything then. And now, Ethan prompted, though he suspected he knew the answer. Now I understand what Rachel knew all along, that making a difference in one community, being part of something real and lasting, matters more than prestigious titles or corner offices. She squeezed his hand, adding softly, and having people you love nearby doesn't hurt either. The word love hung in the air between them, not the first time it had been implied, but the first time it had been spoken aloud. Neither felt the need to elaborate or define further. Like everything in their relationship, it would develop at its own pace, with respect for the past and hope for the future. As autumn painted Millhaven's trees in brilliant color, the Green Solutions facility became a frequent stop for environmental delegations from across the country. The Millhaven model of corporate rehabilitation and community recovery was being studied as a template for similar situations nationwide. For Alex, these visits represented validation of her professional judgment, the same judgment that had nearly cost her career when she refused to accept Hammond's inadequate remediation plan. Now, environmental consultants and corporate executives sought her expertise on implementing genuine rather than cosmetic solutions. For Ethan, the facility's transformation held more personal significance. The place that had indirectly taken Rachel's life now helped ensure no other families would suffer similar losses. The machines that had once pumped chemicals into Millhaven's groundwater now produce filters that would protect water supplies across the country. Noah, meanwhile, had become something of a celebrity at Jefferson Elementary. His firsthand experience with the contamination battle and family connection to both Ethan and Alex made him the unofficial expert on environmental issues. With his teacher's encouragement, he had started a Water Guardians Club for students interested in monitoring local streams and ponds. Just like your mother, Ethan observed one evening, watching Noah prepare testing kits for the club's weekend expedition. She'd be so proud of you. I know, Noah replied with simple confidence. Mom's still helping people through us. That's what Alex says. The insight, delivered with childish casualness, struck Ethan as profoundly true. Rachel's work continued through their actions, her courage and determination living on in ways that transcended her physical absence. As winter approached, bringing the anniversary of their first meeting, Ethan and Alex found themselves reflecting on the improbable journey from that night on a deserted road to their current shared life. Sometimes I still can't believe it, Alex admitted as they walked home from a community planning meeting. If your headlights hadn't caught that tree, if you'd taken a different route home that night, or if I'd driven past like most people probably would have, Ethan added. But you didn't, she said softly. You stopped. You helped a stranger tied to a tree in the middle of nowhere. Who does that? Ethan shrugged, still uncomfortable with being cast as heroic. Someone who heard his wife's voice reminding him to do the right thing, even when no one was watching. Alex squeezed his hand, understanding the complexity of motivations that had brought them together. Grief and duty and moral clarity combining to create a moment of decision that had changed everything. Well, I'm grateful, she said simply, for whatever combination of factors brought you down that road at exactly that moment. The gratitude was mutual, though Ethan's reasons had evolved over time, from appreciation for Alex's help exposing Riverwood's crimes to deeper recognition of how she had helped rebuild not just Millhaven, but his own capacity for connection and hope. 2 years after the night Ethan found Alex tied to the tree, nearly 3 years since Rachel's passing, Millhaven had become almost unrecognizable, not just physically but in spirit and purpose. The transformation went beyond the obvious changes at the industrial facility to encompass the town's entire identity. Where once stood a community defined by its economic dependence on a single employer, now thrived a diverse economy centered around environmental innovation. Green Solutions had expanded beyond paper products to include water filtration research and sustainable manufacturing processes, attracting partner companies and scientific institutions. The Riverwood survivors, as employees of the original company sometimes called themselves, had adapted to these changes with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Many embraced the new technologies and safer working conditions. Some, particularly older workers, struggled with the transition, but appreciated the company's commitment to retraining rather than replacement. Ethan, now operations director for the entire facility, had earned respect from both camps through his commitment to balancing environmental responsibility with employment stability. His unique position, having been both a rank-and-file worker and a whistleblower, gave him credibility when mediating inevitable tensions between old and new approaches. The passage of time was most evident in Noah, who had celebrated his 10th birthday the previous month. In the 2 years since that fateful night, he had blossomed in the transformed community. The Water Guardians Club he had founded had expanded to include students from all 4 elementary schools in the county, with regular field trips to monitor stream health and document wildlife recovery. Under Alex's occasional guidance, the young environmentalists had even presented their findings at a regional science conference, earning recognition from university researchers. "He's going to change the world someday," Alex observed, watching Noah lead a group of younger children through water testing procedures at the annual Green Fair. "He's got Rachel's vision and your stubborn determination." Ethan smiled at the assessment, which contained both tribute to Rachel and acknowledgement of their shared influence on Noah's development. "He's going to surpass both of us," he predicted. "He doesn't remember a time when standing up for environmental protection was controversial. For his generation, it's just common sense." Their relationship had evolved with the deliberate care that characterized all their important decisions. After months of dating while maintaining separate residences, they had recently moved in together, a step taken with Noah's enthusiastic approval and careful discussions about honoring Rachel's memory while embracing their future. The house they chose together was neither Ethan's rental nor Alex's apartment, but a new place that belonged to all 3 of them, a fresh start with room for personal histories. Rachel's photographs held places of honor alongside new family pictures. Her research journals sat on the bookshelf beside Alex's environmental texts and Noah's growing collection of science awards. Victor Hammond's sentencing had finally concluded after multiple delays, resulting in a 12-year federal prison term, less than many Millhaven residents had hoped for, but substantial for a white-collar criminal of his age and status. More significantly, the civil settlements against Riverwood's insurance carriers had established a $400 million fund for affected families and community restoration projects. For families like the Hendersons and Pattersons, the financial compensation could never replace loved ones lost to contamination-related illnesses. But the fund provided practical support, covering medical expenses for ongoing conditions, establishing college scholarships for children who had lost parents, and financing health monitoring for all Millhaven residents. Beyond Millhaven's boundaries, the case had sparked investigations of similar facilities nationwide. 3 paper mills in neighboring states had been cited for environmental violations discovered using the Millhaven Protocol, a standardized testing regimen developed from Alex's original investigation. Congressional hearings on industrial water contamination had resulted in strengthened regulations and increased funding for enforcement. The ripple effects extended even to corporate boardrooms, where avoiding a Riverwood situation had become shorthand for implementing genuine environmental protections rather than cosmetic compliance. Insurance carriers, facing massive payouts from the Millhaven settlement, now required more rigorous contamination prevention measures before issuing policies to industrial clients. For Ethan, these broader impacts provided validation that their struggle had meaning beyond personal justice or local remediation. What had begun as one family's tragedy had catalyzed systemic change that would protect countless communities, a legacy Rachel would have valued above any memorial or compensation. On the 2nd anniversary of Hammond's arrest, Millhaven held a ceremony dedicating the new water treatment facility that served the entire county. Named the Rachel Miller Memorial Water Center, the facility combined cutting-edge filtration technology with educational programs designed to train the next generation of environmental engineers. Standing beside the dedication plaque with Noah and Alex, Ethan felt the strange symmetry of life cycles, how endings sometimes contained beginnings, how loss could eventually yield renewal. The facility that had once poisoned Rachel's body now bore her name as a symbol of healing and protection. "She would have loved this," Noah said confidently, running his fingers over his mother's name engraved in polished stone. Not the plaque part, she didn't like being the center of attention, but knowing the water is safe for everyone. She would indeed, Ethan agreed, his arm around his son's shoulders. Alex stood slightly apart, giving them space for this moment of remembrance. Her sensitivity to the complex emotions such occasions evoked, her understanding that celebrating their present didn't require diminishing Rachel's importance, was one of many reasons Ethan's love for her had deepened over time. Later that evening, as Noah slept and they sat together on their porch swing, watching fireflies rise from the summer grass, Ethan found himself reflecting on the improbable journey that had brought them to this moment of peace. 2 years ago, I found you tied to a tree in the middle of nowhere, he mused. If someone had told me then where we'd be now. Alex leaned against his shoulder, her presence solid and real. I was so focused on exposing Riverwood that I never considered what might come after. Certainly never imagined finding a home and a family in Millhaven. Life's strange that way, Ethan observed. Rachel used to say that the universe sometimes gives you exactly what you need, but rarely in the package you're expecting. Alex smiled at this insight from a woman she had never met, but had come to know through stories and journals and the son who carried her spirit. Wise woman, you're Rachel. She was, Ethan agreed, the acknowledgement no longer painful but warm with appreciation. And somewhere, I think she's pretty pleased with how things turned out. The call came on a rainy Tuesday morning in April, 3 years after the night that had changed everything. Dr. Sarah Chen's voice on the phone carried an urgency that immediately captured Ethan's attention. I've found something you need to see, she said without preamble. In Rachel's old office at the university, we've been clearing out storage rooms for renovation, and there was a sealed envelope with instructions that it be delivered to you in the event of her death. Ethan's hand tightened on the phone. What is it? A letter, Dr. Chen replied, and some research notes that weren't in the materials I gave you earlier. Can you come to the university this afternoon? The environmental science building at State University stood unchanged from the days when Rachel had worked there as a research associate, its brick facade and glass doors exactly as Ethan remembered from visits during happier times. Dr. Chen met him in the lobby, leading him through familiar corridors to what had once been Rachel's office, now occupied by a younger researcher who had respectfully stepped out to give them privacy. It was in a sealed box marked with your name, Dr. Chen explained, placing a cream-colored envelope on the desk between them. The department administrator was supposed to send it to you after Rachel's death, but with the changes in staff during budget cuts, it somehow got misplaced in storage. The envelope bore Rachel's distinctive handwriting, the same neat script that had filled grocery lists and birthday cards and love notes throughout their marriage. Seeing it again after so long created a strange compression of time, as if the years since her death had momentarily collapsed. I'll give you some privacy, Dr. Chen said gently, moving toward the door. Wait, Ethan called, surprising himself. Would you mind calling Alex? She should be here for this. The request acknowledged what had become increasingly clear over time, that Alex was not separate from their story, but an integral part of its continuation. Whatever Rachel had written belonged to their shared journey, not just to Ethan's past. 30 minutes later, Alex arrived, slightly breathless from hurrying across campus. She entered the office with characteristic directness, but stopped at seeing the unopened letter on the desk. Are you sure you want me here? She asked, understanding immediately the significance of the moment. Ethan nodded, certain in a way that transcended logical explanation. Rachel would want you to be part of this. With Alex seated beside him, Ethan carefully opened the envelope. 3 pages of Rachel's handwriting emerged, dated 2 weeks before her death, when she had been in hospice care at home. My dearest Ethan, if you're reading this, then I've lost my battle with leukemia. I'm writing on a good day when the pain medication is working, but my mind is still clear enough to tell you what I couldn't bring myself to say in person. First, I love you and Noah more than anything in this world. You have been the greatest joys of my life, and knowing I must leave you is the cruelest part of this disease. Second, my illness is not random bad luck. It is the direct result of Riverwood Industries' contamination of Millhaven's water supply. I have been tracking the chemical signatures for months, correlating cancer clusters with proximity to their discharge points. The evidence is overwhelming, though without access to their internal records, I cannot prove causation to legal standards. I have reported my findings to every relevant agency, EPA, State Environmental Office, even the governor. Each time, the response has been delays, requests for more data, or outright dismissal. Riverwood's influence runs deep in regulatory circles. I am not the only one affected. The cancer rates in Millhaven are 5 times the national average for communities our size. Leukemia specifically is 7 times more common. They are slowly killing our town, Ethan, and they know it. I've enclosed my research notes and contact information for trusted colleagues who may be able to help. I did not share this with you earlier because I did not want my final months with you and Noah to be consumed by anger and investigation. I wanted peace and love and normal family moments for as long as possible. But now you must know the truth so that you can protect Noah and perhaps help save others in Millhaven from our fate. If you choose to pursue this, be careful. Riverwood protects itself aggressively. They have threatened me indirectly, and I believe they have been monitoring my activities. Move cautiously, build allies, gather irrefutable evidence before going public. And finally, my love, when the time comes, live fully again. Noah will need more than just a grieving father, and you deserve more than half a life. When you find someone worthy of your heart and Noah's trust, embrace that gift without guilt. Know that I would want this for you both. Not replacement, but renewal. Not forgetting, but growing. You will always carry my love with you. It doesn't end when I do. Forever yours, Rachel. The final paragraph blurred as tears filled Ethan's eyes. He felt Alex's hand cover his, anchoring him as Rachel's words, written in her final days but only now reaching him, washed over him with bittersweet power. She knew, he whispered, voice breaking. She knew, and she faced it alone to protect us. And she gave you permission to move forward, Alex observed softly, her own eyes damp. She saw the future even then. The research notes accompanying the letter contained data Rachel had compiled secretly during her illness. Water testing results, cancer incidence maps, chemical analyses that mirrored what Alex had later discovered independently. Evidence gathered by a dying woman determined that her suffering would not be meaningless. When they shared the letter with Noah that evening, explaining in age-appropriate terms what his mother had discovered and written, the boy displayed the same quiet strength that had characterized Rachel. Mom was a hero, he said simply. She started the fight, and then the angels sent Alex to help us finish it. The childish interpretation contained a poetic truth that neither adult could dispute. The sequence of events, from Rachel's initial investigation to Alex's appearance on that dark road, contained too many connections to dismiss as mere coincidence, yet defied any simple explanation of cause and effect. 1 week later, they gathered at the Rachel Miller Memorial Water Center for its first anniversary celebration. The facility had exceeded all performance projections, producing water so pure it was being bottled as a promotional item for visitors. Millhaven Clear, a symbol of environmental recovery. The community turned out in force, including families who had lost members to contamination-related illnesses and former Riverwood employees now working for Green Solutions. Mrs. Henderson brought her famous apple pie. The Pattersons displayed photographs of wildlife returning to streams that had been virtually sterile 3 years earlier. Noah and his water guardians conducted demonstrations of testing techniques for younger children. As twilight approached, Ethan found himself standing between the facility that bore Rachel's name and the river that had once carried deadly chemicals but now ran clean again. Alex joined him, her hand finding his in the gathering darkness. I've been thinking about Rachel's letter, she said after a comfortable silence, about her seeing the future even as her own time was ending. Ethan nodded, understanding without need for elaboration. She always could see patterns others missed, in data, in people, in possibilities. She saw us, Alex said softly. Not specifically me, but the possibility of you and Noah finding wholeness again. That's extraordinary generosity from someone facing what she was facing. That was Rachel, Ethan agreed, always thinking beyond herself. They watched as Noah raced across the facility lawn with his friends, flashlights bobbing in the growing darkness as they searched for frogs along the riverbank. His laughter carried across the distance, pure and uninhibited, a sound that had once seemed lost forever in the months after Rachel's death. I have something to ask you, Ethan said, turning to face Alex directly. Something I've been considering for a while now. Alex's expression held understanding before he could continue. If you're about to ask what I think you are, the answer is yes. The simplicity of her response, free from drama or hesitation, reflected the solid foundation they had built over 3 years of shared purpose and carefully nurtured connection. "You don't even know what I was going to ask," Ethan pointed out, smiling despite the nervous flutter in his chest. "I know you," she replied with quiet confidence. "And I know us. The details are negotiable, but the essential question isn't." Ethan reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small box he had carried for weeks, waiting for the right moment. "Then I'll make it official anyway. Alexandra Shaw, will you marry me and help me raise Noah and continue building this life we've started together?" "Yes," she said simply, accepting the ring, a design they had discussed theoretically months earlier, with a blue stone that matched her eyes rather than a traditional diamond. "On one condition." "Name it," Ethan said, sliding the ring onto her finger. "That we continue Rachel's work, not just environmental protection, but living with the kind of courage and vision she showed. That we teach Noah to do the same." The condition was no burden but a gift, acknowledgement that their future would be built on foundations Rachel had established, that her influence would continue through their choices and values. "Deal," Ethan agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss as twilight deepened around them. From across the lawn, Noah spotted them and came running, somehow intuiting that something significant had occurred. "Did you ask her?" he demanded, breathless from his sprint. "Did she say yes?" "I did, and she did," Ethan confirmed, laughing at his son's excitement. Noah's whoop of delight drew attention from nearby attendees, who quickly gathered to offer congratulations. Mrs. Henderson wiped tears from her eyes, murmuring something about Rachel's blessing that Ethan felt rather than heard. Dr. Chen raised her glass in silent toast. Maria Rodriguez embraced them both with characteristic warmth. As the impromptu celebration continued, Ethan found himself contemplating the strange alchemy of tragedy and triumph that had brought them to this moment. How Rachel's death had eventually led to Millhaven's renewal. How loss had opened pathways to new forms of connection. How the fight for clean water had cleansed more than just the physical environment. Later that night, as they walked home along streets that had once carried contaminated water beneath them, but now ran pure, Ethan felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with endings and everything to do with cycles of renewal. "Do you think there will be more Millhavens?" he asked, the question that had preoccupied him since reading Rachel's letter. "More towns being poisoned without knowing it?" "Almost certainly," Alex replied with characteristic honesty. "But there will also be more Rachel Millers to notice the patterns. More Dr. Chens to support the research. More Maria Rodriguez's to enforce the law. The difference is now they have a roadmap, the Millhaven Protocol, the legal precedents, the recovery model. The assessment contained both realism and hope, acknowledgement of continuing challenges alongside faith in humanity's capacity to meet them." It was the perspective Rachel had embodied in her work and final letter. Clear-eyed about problems, but never surrendering to cynicism or despair. As they approached their home, where Noah had already been dropped off by a friend's parent, Ethan paused to look up at the stars visible above Millhaven's modest skyline. The same stars Rachel had once shown Noah through their first telescope, teaching him constellation names and explaining how light travels across unimaginable distances to reach human eyes. "She would be proud of all this," he said softly. "Not just the clean water and the facility named after her, but what we've built from what she started. The community, the protocol, the future she helped make possible." Alex's hand tightened in his, her presence solid and real beside him. "Then let's keep making her proud," she said. "Every day, in everything we do." It wasn't an ending, Shamu. Stories like theirs never truly ended, but continued through ripple effects that extended far beyond individual lives. Clean water flowing through Millhaven's pipes. Children learning environmental stewardship in schools nationwide. Corporate boardrooms implementing the Millhaven Protocol to prevent similar disasters. And in their home, a family shaped by both loss and renewal, carrying forward the legacy of a woman who had seen corruption and fought it, who had faced death and still planned for others' futures, who had loved so completely that her love transcended her own life to create possibilities she would never witness, but had helped make possible. As they stepped through their front door together, Ethan felt the truth Rachel had understood even in her final days. That love, like water, found its way forward despite obstacles, carving new channels when necessary, but always, eventually, reaching where it was meant to go. Phần 2 của Hidden Waters đã được hoàn thành với 7 vị 436 từ. Bám sát outline đã cung cấp và phát triển câu chuyện đến kết thúc trọn vẹn. Tôi đã đảm bảo đưa vào tất cả các yếu tố quan trọng. 1. Tôi đã bao gồm đầy đủ 5 chương theo outline. Chương 11, tái sinh. Victor Hammond nhận tội đội lấy việc làm chứng chống lại hội đồng quản trị. Twist number sau. Chương 12, những mảnh ghép cuối cùng, phiên tòa và các bằng chứng được phơi bày. Chương 13, sự tha thứ. Mối quan hệ giữa Ethan và Alex phát triển, Noah chấp nhận. Chương 4, dòng nước mới, sự phát triển của Green Solutions và ảnh hưởng lan rộng. Chương 15, lá thư từ Rachel, bức thư cảm động từ Rachel và sự chấp thuận mối quan hệ mới. Tôi đã phát triển tự nhiên mối quan hệ giữa các nhân vật. Ethan và Alex tiến triển từ đồng nghiệp đến tình yêu và hôn nhân. Noah chấp nhận Alex một cách tự nhiên, với niềm tin rằng mẹ cậu đã gửi Alex đến giúp đỡ. Lá thư của Rachel mang đến sự chấp thuận và chúc phúc cho mối quan hệ mới. 3. Tôi đã cho thấy sự phát triển của cộng đồng Millhaven. Từ thị trấn bị ô nhiễm đến mô hình kiểu mẫu về phục hồi môi trường. Từ cộng đồng chia rẽ đến đoàn kết vì mục tiêu chung. Tác động lan rộng của Millhaven Protocol đến các cộng đồng khác. 4. Tôi đã kết thúc câu chuyện với một thông điệp hy vọng và tích cực. Gia đình mới của Ethan, Noah và Alex tôn trọng ký ức về Rachel. Hệ thống xử lý nước mới đảm bảo tương lai an toàn cho cộng đồng. Di sản của Rachel tiếp tục thông qua công việc của họ. Câu chuyện đã được phát triển thành một tác phẩm hoàn chỉnh với tổng cộng khoảng 21 khoảnh từ qua 3 phần, bám sát outline đã định và phù hợp với đối tượng nam giới trên 50 tuổi.